still remember how normal Jamie looked on my screen that night. The same messy bedroom in the background, the same faded band poster on the wall, the same person I'd known since secondary school, smiling at me through my laptop. There wasn't a single warning sign that in just a few minutes, everything I thought I knew about my oldest friend would shatter, leaving me trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I'm writing this down because I need to process what happened, but I can't bring myself to tell a therapist. They'd be obligated to report it, and honestly, I'm terrified of what might happen if this gets out. So I'm putting it here anonymously, hoping that maybe someone will understand or at least learn from my experience. Perhaps writing it out will help me make sense of how someone I trusted completely could do something so horrific. Last winter, I was in my final year at university in Edinburgh, while Jamie was working in London. We'd been close since we were 13, the kind of friendship that survives distance and time. We had a standing FaceTime call every other Thursday, just to catch up and stay connected despite being hundreds of miles apart. These calls were a highlight in my otherwise stressful week of coursework and part-time jobs. Just a normal ritual between friends, nothing unusual or concerning about it. That particular Thursday in November was miserable outside, raining so hard I could hear it drumming against my window in the student flat. I remember being grateful I didn't have to go anywhere that evening. I'd made a cup of tea, wrapped myself in a blanket, and settled in for our usual hour-long chat. The call connected, and there was Alex, looking slightly tired but smiling as always. The first 20 minutes were completely normal. We talked about our weeks, complained about work and studies, gossiped about mutual friends. Jamie had recently started a new job at a tech company, something to do with cybersecurity that I didn't fully understand, but sounded impressive. There had been a lot of talk about dark web monitoring and threat assessment, terms that meant little to me at the time, but would soon take on a horrifying new significance. I noticed Jamie seemed a bit distracted, occasionally glancing to the side at something off screen. I didn't think much of it, probably just checking messages or emails. But then there was a shift in the conversation. Jamie asked if I was alone in my flat, if my roommates were out for the evening. They were, a detail I confirmed without hesitation, because why wouldn't I? This was Jamie after all. That's when everything changed. Jamie's expression became more serious, more focused. There was this intensity in those eyes that I'd never seen before. Jamie leaned closer to the camera and said that there was something important to show me, something I needed to see to understand the work being done at the new company. I remember feeling a flicker of unease at the sudden change in tone, but I brushed it off. This was my oldest friend, someone I trusted implicitly. When Jamie said to keep an open mind about what I was about to see, I nodded, curious but unsuspecting. Jamie's screen went black for a moment, then changed to a screen share. I expected to see some kind of technical diagram or perhaps a presentation. Instead, the screen filled with what looked like a video feed of a room I didn't recognize. The space was dimly lit with a reddish tint, giving everything a surreal, almost dreamlike quality. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Just a sparse room with concrete walls, what looked like a metal table, and some shapes I couldn't quite distinguish. Then the camera angle shifted slightly, and I realized with a jolt that there was a person in the room, strapped to a chair. They were struggling against their restraints, their movements desperate and terrified. The video quality was good enough that I could see the fear in their eyes, the way their chest heaved with panicked breathing. I felt my stomach drop. My first thought was that this must be some kind of prank, or maybe a clip from a horror film Alex was showing me as a joke. But deep down, I knew immediately that what I was seeing was real. There was an authenticity to the fear in that person's eyes that no actor could replicate. On the side of the screen, There was some kind of chat interface where messages were scrolling by too quickly to read. At the bottom were buttons or commands with labels I couldn't quite make out from my view. It looked like some kind of interactive live stream, but unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I was frozen in shock, unable to process what was happening. Before I could even form words to ask what the hell was going on, Jamie's voice came through, explaining that this was what was called a red room on the dark web, a live stream where viewers could watch and even request acts of violence in real time. Jamie spoke with a detached fascination, like this was an interesting documentary we were watching together, rather than a real person in terror. The worst part was how casual Jamie sounded, while explaining that the company wasn't just monitoring these sites, they were running some of them. That this was where the real money was in cybersecurity, creating and managing these illegal streams for wealthy clients who paid thousands to watch or participate. I couldn't speak. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be Alex, my friend since childhood, showing me something so horrific with such calm detachment. But the video continued playing, and the person in the chair continued struggling, and Alex continued explaining how the whole operation worked. Then came the moment that still haunts my nightmares. Jamie said that the company had been impressed with my psychology background and computer skills, that they'd been watching me through Jamie for months, that they thought I had potential to join their special projects team, and to prove I was suitable, I needed to participate tonight. The camera on my laptop suddenly lit up, indicating it was active even though I hadn't touched it. On Alex's shared screen, my face appeared in a small window above the video feed. My name appeared in the chat scroll. Whoever was running this stream now knew who I was. I could see my own horrified expression alongside the victim in the room. I tried to end the call, but my computer wouldn't respond. I tried to close the laptop, but Jamie's voice sharpened, warning me that closing the connection now would be seen as rejection of their offer. And they didn't allow people to reject offers once they'd seen what I'd seen. The implication was clear. I was being recorded watching this. I was now implicated, my face and name captured alongside this horrific content. If I didn't cooperate, that recording could be sent to the police, to my university, to my family, or worse, I could end up like the person in that chair. My mind was spinning with panic and betrayal. This person I'd trusted for over a decade had just dragged me into something nightmarish without my consent. Had Jamie always been this person? Or had something changed? I couldn't reconcile the friend I thought I knew with the monster on my screen. Jamie instructed me to select one of the commands from the menu that had appeared on my screen. Simple options were available for first-time participants, I was told. Nothing too extreme. Just enough to prove my commitment. I felt physically sick, tears streaming down my face as I realized the impossible situation I was in. If I participated, I would be complicit in someone's suffering. If I refused, I could be implicated or become a victim myself. There seemed to be no way out. In desperation, I yanked my router's power cable from the wall, cutting my internet connection entirely. The screen froze, then went black. The silence in my flat was deafening after the intensity of what had just happened. I sat there shaking for what felt like hours, expecting my phone to ring, expecting someone to knock on my door, expecting some immediate consequence for my refusal to participate. But nothing happened that night. The next day, I went to the campus IT department and had them check my laptop for any spyware or malicious software. I made up a story about getting strange pop-ups. They found nothing unusual. I changed all my passwords, deleted my social media accounts, and bought a new laptop just to be safe. I never heard from Jamie again. My messages went unanswered. Social media profiles disappeared. Mutual friends said they hadn't been in touch either. It was as if Jamie had vanished completely. For weeks afterward, I jumped at every notification, every unexpected sound. I covered my laptop camera with tape. I changed my phone number, moved to a different flat. I even considered dropping out of university and moving back home. But the fear that whatever Alex was involved with could find me there too kept me from running. It's been 6 months now. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was all some elaborate hoax or nightmare. But then I'll see a news story about dark web arrests, or I'll catch a glimpse of someone who resembles the person in that chair, and it all comes flooding back. I still don't know if Jamie was forced into recruiting me, if there really is a company using cybersecurity as a front for these streams, or if my oldest friend had been hiding a dark fascination that eventually evolved into participation. I don't know if I'm still being watched, or if cutting the connection that night was enough to remove me from their radar. What I do know is that trust is fragile, and the people closest to us can hide unimaginable secrets. I know that somewhere in the darkest corners of the internet, these rooms exist, and real people suffer while others watch. And I know that someone I love tried to drag me into that darkness. I check over my shoulder constantly now. I live with a persistent, gnawing fear that someday my laptop will turn on by itself, or my phone will ring with a FaceTime call from an unknown number, and I'll see that room again. Or worse, that someday I'll be the one in the chair, punishment for refusing to participate when given the chance. The most terrifying part isn't even the red room itself. It's that someone I trusted completely, someone whose face I would never have questioned seeing on my screen, was the doorway to that horror. And now, I can't trust any face at all. I'm still not entirely sure whether I should be worried about this, but something about my fitness tracking app has been bothering me for weeks now. I've never been particularly athletic, but during my final year at university in Southampton, I decided I needed to do something about the weight I'd gained from 3 years of living on pizza and energy drinks. Nothing dramatic, just enough exercise to feel better about myself and maybe improve my energy levels for dissertation writing. The campus gym was intimidating and expensive. Running outdoors felt too public for someone as unfit as I was. So I settled on long walks around the city and basic exercises I could do in my room. Simple stuff that didn't require equipment or expertise, just consistency and gradual improvement. To track my progress, I downloaded a fitness app that had been recommended by several friends. It monitored walking routes, counted steps, estimated calories burned, and provided encouragement through achievements and social features that let you compare progress with other users. The app was free and seemed well designed, with comprehensive tracking features that motivated me to walk further and exercise more regularly. Within a few weeks, I was genuinely enjoying the routine and feeling noticeably better both physically and mentally. But after using the app for about a month, I started noticing things that seemed odd about how it collected and used data. The location tracking was more detailed than seemed necessary for basic fitness monitoring. Instead of just recording walking routes and distances, the app was documenting exactly where I went, how long I spent in each location, and patterns in my daily movements that went well beyond exercise tracking. When I checked the app's privacy settings, I found that it was collecting information about my sleep patterns, heart rate variations, and even ambient sound levels during workouts. Much more comprehensive physiological monitoring than would be needed for simple step counting and distance measurement. The social features also seem designed to gather personal information rather than just facilitate fitness motivation. The app encouraged users to share detailed profiles including photos, personal goals, daily schedules, and even information about where they lived and worked. Other users could see not just your exercise statistics, but comprehensive data about your location patterns, activity levels at different times, and personal information that would be valuable for anyone wanting to track or target specific individuals. I started paying closer attention to the other users who appeared in my social feed and the types of interactions the app encouraged between fitness tracking community members. What I found was concerning. Many profiles seemed designed to gather information about other users rather than share genuine fitness experiences. Accounts that asked detailed questions about people's routines, living situations, and daily activities while providing minimal information about their own circumstances. Some users specifically targeted people who lived alone, had predictable schedules, or shared information about feeling isolated or vulnerable. The fitness community was being used as a recruitment tool for identifying potential victims of various types of exploitation. When I tried to research the company behind the fitness app, I found minimal information about their business operations, data protection policies, or regulatory oversight of their health monitoring services. The app was free because users weren't the customers. They were the product being sold to buyers who wanted detailed information about people's daily routines, physical capabilities, and personal vulnerabilities. I realized that my fitness tracking data was probably being sold to criminals who specialized in targeting people based on their movement patterns, living situations, and physiological information. The comprehensive location tracking would be valuable for burglars who wanted to know when people were away from home. The health monitoring data could identify targets who were physically vulnerable or dealing with medical conditions that might affect their ability to resist attacks. Most disturbing was the possibility that the social features were being used to facilitate stalking and harassment by providing detailed information about users' daily routines and personal circumstances. But by the time I understood what was happening, I'd been using the app for several months and had provided comprehensive data about my movements, health, and personal situation to people whose intentions were clearly not focused on fitness support. When I tried to delete my account and remove my data from the platform, I found that the app's privacy policies made it nearly impossible to completely eliminate information that had already been collected and potentially shared with third parties. The fitness tracking that I'd thought would help me become healthier had instead made me a target for people who specialized in exploiting detailed personal information for criminal purposes. But the most troubling realization was that fitness and health apps were probably being systematically used as surveillance tools to gather intelligence about vulnerable populations. People seeking to improve their health and well-being were unknowingly providing criminals with everything they needed to plan targeted attacks, burglaries, and other forms of exploitation. The data I'd voluntarily shared while trying to get fit was now part of databases that were used to facilitate serious crimes against people who had trusted technology companies to protect their personal information. I stopped using the app immediately, but the damage was already done. Months of location data, health information, and personal details were permanently part of systems that specialized in turning fitness motivation into opportunities for criminal exploitation. After I deleted the app, someone broke into my flat while I was at my regular Tuesday evening lecture, taking only items that matched exactly what I'd photographed and shared through the fitness community's achievement system. Okay, so this might just be me, but have you ever had a moment when your phone screen shows you something disturbing and you immediately check over your shoulder to make sure no one can see what you're looking at, even when you're completely alone? 4 months ago, I experienced something on the dark web that I've been unable to shake from my mind. So here goes. It started on an entirely ordinary Tuesday evening. I just finished a late dinner, microwave lasagna, nothing special, and was sitting on the toilet, mindlessly scrolling through my phone as one does. I'd been fascinated with the dark web for about a year by that point. Not because I wanted anything illegal, mind you. I've always been the curious type, ever since I was a kid taking apart my toys to see how they worked. Studied computer science at university, worked in IT for 8 years now. I suppose that's why I first downloaded Tor. Professional curiosity, I told myself. A bit of a lie, that. I'd browse the dark web occasionally when bored, usually after a few drinks, mostly just looking at marketplaces selling counterfeit goods or dodgy pharmaceuticals. Nothing too sinister, though there was always that thrill of knowing I was somewhere I perhaps shouldn't be, like a digital urban explorer. That night, I'd had a couple of whiskeys after a particularly stressful day at work. My boss had been on my case about some server issues that weren't even my department. The bathroom was the only place my flatmate wouldn't disturb me. So there I sat, trousers around my ankles, scrolling through forums I had no business visiting. I'd found my way onto a forum I hadn't seen before. Black background, red text, very 90s web design. The site claimed to be for practical solutions to complex problems. Vague enough to sound legitimate at first glance. I was scrolling through thread titles, mostly stuff about bypassing security systems or creating untraceable identities, when I saw a post titled DIY Silence Methods. My finger hovered over it for a moment. The title was just ambiguous enough that it could have been about soundproofing a room or creating white noise to help with sleep, but something in my gut told me it wasn't. Still, curiosity got the better of me. It always does, doesn't it? I tapped the thread. The page loaded slowly. Tor's never been known for its speed. And what appeared made me physically recoil. The thread contained meticulously detailed guides for creating homemade torture devices. Not historical information or theoretical concepts, but step-by-step instructions with diagrams showing how to build tools specifically designed to cause pain, without leaving visible marks. Tools designed to extract information, while keeping the victim conscious. Tools designed for silence. I remember my bathroom suddenly felt very cold. The radiator had been on full blast. My flatmate always complained about my excessive heating bills, but I felt goosebumps forming on my arms. What disturbed me most wasn't just the content itself, but the clinical, almost academic tone, as if the author was explaining how to assemble IKEA furniture, not instruments of suffering. And worse still were the comments beneath each design, users suggesting improvements or sharing their field test results. I should have closed the app immediately, should have deleted Tor, reset my phone, and forgotten the whole thing. Instead, like a witness to a car crash, I couldn't look away. I scrolled further, reading through post after post. People were casually discussing the merits of different techniques, like they were reviewing kitchen appliances. This method is too messy for apartment use. This one tends to cause unconsciousness too quickly. I found adding this modification extends the process by several hours. My stomach churned. The microwave lasagna threatened to make a reappearance. Yet I kept scrolling, telling myself I was just documenting the depravity, as if I were some sort of digital anthropologist studying the darkest corners of humanity. What a load of rubbish. I was rubbernecking at human suffering. That's when I noticed the view counter at the bottom of the thread. Only 3 people were currently viewing this horrendous content. The forum administrator, someone with the rank field expert, 3 people in a hidden corner of the internet that should require specific knowledge even to find. I suddenly felt very exposed, like I'd wandered into a private meeting I wasn't invited to. As I was about to close the app, a notification appeared at the top of my screen. A private message. The username matched the field expert, currently viewing the thread. My thumb hovered over the notification. Every instinct told me not to open it. But again, that damn curiosity. I tapped it. First time browsing our resources. I notice you've been on this page for 16 minutes, looking for something specific. I offer practical demonstrations for serious clients. My blood ran cold. 16 minutes. Had I really been staring at this horror show for that long? And what did they mean by practical demonstrations? I didn't respond, immediately closing the app and shutting off my phone entirely. I sat there in the bathroom, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. Trousers around my ankles, the faint drip of the leaky tap, the only sound breaking the silence. I finally gathered myself, washed my hands thoroughly, as if I could somehow clean away what I'd seen, and went to bed. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept thinking about how the person had known exactly how long I'd been viewing the thread. Was there some tracker embedded in the page? Had I compromised my anonymity somehow? I told myself I was being paranoid. The dark web is supposed to be anonymous. That's the whole point. This was probably just a scammer trying to frighten naive browsers into paying for services that didn't exist. The next morning, I convinced myself it was nothing to worry about. Just another internet weirdo trying to seem more dangerous than they actually were. I went to work, had a relatively normal day, and had almost put the incident out of my mind by the time I got home. Almost. That evening, I received an email to my personal account, not my work email or any address I'd ever used with Tor. The subject line, regarding your interest in silence methods. The body contained only an attachment, a PDF. I scanned it with 3 different antivirus programs before opening it. It wasn't malware, it was worse. The PDF contained a customized silence method, tailored specifically for someone matching my exact physical description. Height, weight, even the small scar on my left wrist from a childhood accident. The document detailed how my apartment layout, which it described with disturbing accuracy, would provide optimal acoustics for the procedure. It mentioned how my neighbor's hearing impairment would be advantageous. It specified which of my kitchen implements would be most effective. I felt the world tilt sideways. How could they possibly know these things about me? I'd been so careful with my identity online. I'd used Tor correctly. I'd never entered personal information. My hands shook as I deleted the email, then emptied my trash folder, as if that would somehow protect me. I spent that night at a friend's house, making up some story about a water leak in my flat. I didn't sleep. Couldn't even close my eyes without seeing those diagrams, now with my face superimposed on the victim. The next day, I contacted my internet provider, changed all my passwords, and factory reset my phone. I convinced myself that someone had hacked my device, that it was all just an elaborate scam to frighten me. I almost believed it too. 3 days later, I came home from work to find my apartment door unlocked. Nothing was missing. Nothing was visibly disturbed. But on my kitchen table sat a small metal object I'd never seen before. It matched exactly one of the components shown in the torture device diagrams, a custom thumb screw with peculiar modifications. Beside it was a handwritten note. For your consideration, field testing appointment scheduled for Friday. I didn't pack. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? that I'd been browsing torture methods on the dark web, and now someone wanted to demonstrate them on me. I grabbed my passport, wallet, and the clothes on my back. I drove straight to my parents' house in Scotland, 6 hours away, checking my rearview mirror the entire journey. I stayed there for 2 weeks, told them I was on holiday. When I finally returned to London, I moved to a new flat in a different area. I changed my phone number, email addresses, even deleted all my social media. I never went back on the dark web, never wanted to. It's been 4 months now, no more strange emails, no more unlocked doors or mysterious objects. I should feel safe, but I don't. Because here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. Whoever found me didn't do it through some dark web tracking. They found me in the real world. They had physical access to my home, which means they weren't just some distant internet bogeyman. They were close. Possibly someone I know. Possibly someone I still interact with every day. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on the toilet, scrolling through perfectly innocent websites on my new phone, I'll remember those diagrams. I'll remember how casually people discuss methods of causing unimaginable pain. And I'll wonder if the person who sent me that PDF is watching me right now, silently testing my new security, waiting for the perfect moment to reschedule our field testing appointment. Because that's the thing about the dark web. It's not just some abstract digital realm separate from our everyday lives. The people there are real. They live among us. They could be anyone. The friendly IT guy at your office. The quiet neighbor who always nods hello. And sometimes, when you glimpse their other life, they notice you noticing them. And they don't like it one bit. There's something about being a creature of habit that feels comforting, isn't there? Knowing what you'll be doing on any given day, following the same routes, stopping at the same places, the predictability of it all. I used to think that made life easier, more manageable. I'd wake up at the same time each morning, take the same walk before breakfast, go through the same routines that had developed naturally over years of living alone. It felt safe, I suppose, structured. The kind of life where you don't have to think too hard about what comes next, because you've done it all 100 times before. I'm an occupational therapist, working with elderly clients at their homes across Hull and the surrounding areas. It's rewarding work, helping people maintain independence in their daily lives, adapting their environments to make things easier as mobility or cognitive function declines. I've been doing it for around 14 years now, long enough that I've developed quite set patterns in how I structure my days. I visit the same clients on the same days each week, take the same routes between appointments, stop at the same cafe for lunch most days because I know what I'll get, and it's convenient. I live in a terraced house near the city centre. Bought it about 8 years ago when property prices were still reasonable. It's a nice enough area, quiet street, neighbours I recognise, but don't really know beyond polite nods when we're putting bins out. I've lived alone since I bought the place, prefer it that way honestly. After spending days helping people navigate challenging situations, there's something restorative about coming home to space that's entirely your own, where you can be completely yourself without having to maintain any professional demeanour. My routines at home are as predictable as my work schedule. Morning walk at 6:30, same route around the nearby park regardless of weather. Coffee from the same shop on the corner before I start seeing clients. Home by 6 most evenings, dinner around 7, usually something simple because I'm tired from the day. Television for an hour or so, then bed by 10 because I need proper sleep to function effectively in my job. Weekends follow their own patterns. Saturday morning shopping at the same supermarket, Sunday afternoon walk along the marina, that sort of thing. I never thought about how visible these routines were to anyone paying attention. Never occurred to me that predictability could be a vulnerability rather than just a comfort. Why would it? I'm not particularly wealthy, don't own anything especially valuable, live a quiet, unremarkable life helping elderly people maintain theirs. There's nothing about me that would make anyone think I'm worth paying attention to. Nothing that would suggest I'm a target for anything more serious than maybe an opportunistic burglary. But apparently, that's not how these things work. Apparently, the very ordinariness of my life, the predictability of my routines, the fact that I live alone and follow the same patterns week after week, all of that made me exactly the sort of person someone was looking for. Not for anything I owned or any particular reason related to who I am, but simply because my life was documented and consistent enough to be useful to people I'd never meet, who had purposes I couldn't have imagined. It started, as far as I can tell, about 18 months ago, though I didn't know anything was happening at the time. I was just living my normal life, following my comfortable routines, completely unaware that someone was systematically documenting every aspect of my daily patterns. Where I went, when I went there, how long I stayed, what routes I took between locations. All of it recorded with precision that seems excessive until you understand what it was being used for. I first became aware something might be wrong when a colleague mentioned she'd seen me in a part of town I don't usually visit. She said she'd waved, but I hadn't seemed to notice, which was odd, because I'm generally quite observant about my surroundings. The problem was, I hadn't been in that area on the day she mentioned. I'd been visiting clients on the opposite side of the city, following my usual Thursday schedule. When I explained this, she seemed confused, but we both shrugged it off as a case of mistaken identity. Then it happened again, a few weeks later. A former client's daughter mentioned seeing me at the marina on a Sunday morning, said she'd been surprised because she knew I usually went there in the afternoons. Again, I hadn't been there that morning. I'd been at home doing housework, my typical Sunday morning routine. This time, the coincidence felt less comfortable, but I still assumed it was just someone who looked similar to me, being spotted in places I was known to frequent. The third incident was more unsettling. My neighbour, an older woman who lives 2 doors down and who I occasionally chat with when we're both outside, mentioned that she'd seen someone in my back garden late one evening. She'd been letting her cat out and noticed a figure standing near my back door, looking at the windows. She'd assumed it was me initially, but then realized the person was wearing different clothes than she'd seen me in earlier that day. By the time she thought to say something, the figure had left. That conversation made me properly uneasy. Someone in my garden, specifically, examining my windows. That wasn't a case of mistaken identity or coincidental resemblance. That was someone deliberately on my property, potentially trying to work out how to access my house. I checked all my locks that evening, made sure windows were secure, but I couldn't see any evidence of attempted entry or damage. I reported it to the police, more to have it documented than because I expected them to do much about it. They were sympathetic but honest about the limitations. Someone standing in a garden isn't itself a crime unless they're attempting to enter the property or causing damage. And by the time my neighbour mentioned it, whoever it was had long since left. They said they'd increase patrols in the area and advised me to contact them immediately if I noticed any further suspicious activity. Nothing obvious happened for a few weeks after that, and I started to relax slightly. Perhaps it had been someone genuinely confused about which house they were trying to visit, or a would-be burglar who'd moved on to easier targets after seeing my neighbour watching. I convinced myself it was an isolated incident that wouldn't be repeated. Then I started noticing small changes around my house. Nothing dramatic, just minor details that seemed slightly off. A plant pot on my back step moved a few inches from where I'd left it. The gate to my garden unlatched when I was certain I'd secured it. A bin moved from its usual position against the side wall. Each incident was small enough to dismiss as wind or cats or my own faulty memory, but together they created a pattern that felt deliberate. I became more vigilant, paying attention to exactly how I left things so I could be certain if they'd been disturbed. The disturbances continued, not frequently, maybe once a week or so, but consistent enough that I couldn't dismiss them as coincidence or imagination. Someone was accessing my garden regularly, moving small things, making their presence known in subtle ways. I installed a camera covering the back garden, one of those basic motion-activated security cameras that uploads footage to your phone. For the first few days, it showed nothing unusual. Just cats passing through, birds landing on the fence, the occasional fox at night. Then on the fourth night, around 2 a.m, it captured someone entering my garden through the back gate. The figure was dressed in dark clothes and moved carefully, checking the camera's position before doing anything else. They spent several minutes examining my back door and windows, trying handles, apparently checking if anything was unlocked. When everything proved secure, they took photographs of the locks and windows with their phone, taking their time to capture multiple angles. Then they left as quietly as they'd arrived, closing the gate carefully behind them. I took the footage to the police immediately. This time they treated it more seriously. Clear evidence of someone attempting to access my property, photographing security measures, behavior that suggested planning for future criminal activity. They assigned someone to investigate and asked if anything else unusual had happened recently. I mentioned the sightings of someone who looked like me in various locations, which I'd previously dismissed as a mistaken identity. The detective's expression changed when I mentioned that. She asked for specific details about when and where these sightings had occurred, who had seen me, what I'd been wearing according to witnesses. She seemed particularly interested in the timing and locations, making notes about my usual routines and when the supposed sightings had happened. A few days later, she contacted me again, asking if I'd be willing to let them check my house for surveillance equipment. That suggestion was disturbing in a way the garden intrusions hadn't been. The possibility that I'd been watched inside my own home without knowing it, that my private life had been observed and recorded. I agreed immediately, needing to know if my home had been compromised beyond just the external security concerns. The search took several hours. Specialists went through every room with detection equipment, checking for hidden cameras or recording devices. They found 3, one in my living room smoke detector, one hidden in the kitchen extractor fan, and one in my bedroom ceiling light. All of them had been in place for at least several months, recording and transmitting footage continuously. The detective explained what they believed was happening, though even now I struggle to fully comprehend it. My routines had been documented and sold on the dark web as part of what they called a comprehensive identity package. The surveillance footage, the photographs of me in various locations, detailed notes about my schedule and habits. All of it compiled into a profile that could be purchased by people interested in assuming someone else's identity, at least temporarily. The person who looked like me, who'd been spotted in various locations around Hull, had apparently purchased my identity profile. They'd studied my routines, my appearance, my typical clothing and behavior. until they could convincingly impersonate me in casual situations where detailed scrutiny wasn't likely. The sightings that had been reported to me were probably test runs, checking if they could pass as me in familiar locations without being challenged. The detective showed me the dark web marketplace where my profile was listed. It was organized like a professional service database, with categories for different types of identity profiles. People with established routines, predictable schedules, lives that could be temporarily borrowed for various purposes. My listing was categorized under solitary professionals with consistent patterns and minimal social oversight. The profile included everything someone would need to impersonate me convincingly in non-intimate situations. Photographs showing my appearance from multiple angles, including shots taken from the surveillance footage in my home. Detailed documentation of my daily routines, what I wore on different occasions, where I went and when. Notes about my mannerisms and behavior patterns based on analysis of the surveillance footage. Even information about my clients and work schedule, apparently gathered from observing my comings and goings over several months. The listing emphasized the stability and predictability of my routines, marketing that as valuable for buyers who needed to assume someone's identity for extended periods. It mentioned that I lived alone with minimal family contact, making me less likely to be immediately missed if someone was using my identity elsewhere. It noted that my work involved visiting clients independently, providing legitimate reasons for my presence in various locations at different times. The purchase history showed my profile had been bought by 4 different accounts. The detective explained that these profiles were valuable for various criminal purposes, creating alibis, accessing locations under false pretenses, evading law enforcement by using another person's identity and routine. Someone who looked reasonably similar to me could use my identity profile to be seen in places whilst crimes were being committed elsewhere, or to access locations they'd otherwise have no legitimate reason to visit. She walked me through what they'd learned about the impersonations that had occurred. The person my colleague had seen wasn't me, but someone using my profile who'd been establishing that they could pass as me in public. The sighting at the marina had been another test, checking if they could match my routine closely enough that people who knew me casually would mistake them for me. These weren't random acts. They were systematic preparation for using my identity for purposes I still don't fully understand. The investigation revealed a substantial operation. Hundreds of people had their routines documented and identity profiles created without their knowledge. Surveillance equipment installed during legitimate service visits or through other forms of access. Detailed observation of daily patterns over months or years. All of it compiled into profiles sold to people who needed to borrow someone else's identity temporarily for criminal purposes. The person caught in my garden on camera had been updating my profile with current information about my security measures. The marketplace offered profile refreshes as an additional service. Buyers could pay for updated intelligence if they needed current information, rather than potentially outdated details from when the profile was first created. The cameras in my house had been providing ongoing footage that kept my profile current and valuable. Several arrests were made, including the person who'd been caught on camera in my garden. But the identity profiles themselves had been widely distributed before law enforcement discovered the operation. My profile, along with hundreds of others, existed in private collections of people who downloaded it before the marketplace was shut down. The detective couldn't tell me who the 4 buyers were or what they'd use my identity for, only that investigations were ongoing. I had all the surveillance equipment removed and upgraded every security measure I could afford. Changed my locks, installed proper cameras covering all approaches to my house, started varying my routines deliberately to avoid being as predictable as I'd been. But the psychological damage was deeper than any physical security measure could address. Someone had been living as me, at least partially, walking through places I usually went, being seen by people who knew me, using my identity and routine for purposes I'd never know. My life had been borrowed without permission, my predictable patterns weaponized against me, my comfortable routines turned into vulnerabilities that strangers exploited for their own purposes. I moved house 6 months after discovering the identity profile, not just because of what had happened, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that someone still knew too much about my life there. My routines, my habits, my patterns, all of it documented in profiles that existed somewhere beyond my ability to control or delete. Even in a new location with deliberately varied patterns, I can't escape the knowledge that for months, someone studied me closely enough to impersonate me, that strangers borrowed my identity for purposes I'll never fully understand. The detective mentioned that this type of identity theft was increasingly common. Not financial identity theft, where someone uses your personal details to access accounts, but physical identity theft where someone becomes you in the real world for short periods. The dark web marketplaces facilitated this by providing detailed profiles of people with predictable, documented lives that could be temporarily borrowed. She explained that buyers often purchase multiple profiles, testing different identities in low-risk situations before using them for more serious purposes. My profile had been bought by 4 different accounts, meaning 4 separate people or groups had paid for detailed information about how to convincingly be me for limited periods, what they'd used it for, whether crimes had been committed under my identity, whether anyone had been harmed by someone pretending to be me. Those questions remained unanswered. I think about those 4 unknown buyers constantly. Who were they? Why did they need to borrow my identity specifically? What situations required them to appear to be a solitary occupational therapist with predictable routines living in Hull? Were they local, people I might have encountered without knowing they'd studied footage of me sleeping and going about my private life? Or were they from elsewhere, using my profile for purposes that required temporary presence in this area? The uncertainty is corrosive. Not knowing what my identity was used for, whether crimes were committed while someone appeared to be me, whether people I interact with now might have previously encountered someone impersonating me. My comfortable routines, which had felt safe and manageable, had actually made me vulnerable to exploitation I'd never imagined possible. I still work as an occupational therapist, still help elderly clients maintain their independence. But I've learned that the independence I valued in my own life, the solitary routines, the predictable patterns, the life structured around familiar habits, created vulnerabilities that sophisticated criminals could exploit systematically. My identity was documented, packaged, and sold to people who needed to be someone else temporarily. And I discovered this only because one of them made mistakes that led investigators to me. The profile exists somewhere still. Months of surveillance footage showing my most private moments, detailed documentation of my routines and habits, photographs and analysis that allow someone who looks vaguely similar to me to convincingly impersonate me in casual situations. That information is outdated now that I've moved and changed my patterns, but it still exists in collections I'll never access, potentially being shared through networks I can't monitor. That's what I think about now when I see people following predictable routines, living solitary lives structured around familiar habits. Not that they're living comfortably within patterns that suit them, but that they might be creating comprehensive profiles of themselves without knowing it. That their predictability might be observed and documented by people who see routine as valuable intelligence, who understand that the most comfortable lives are often the most vulnerable to this particular type of exploitation. I was a creature of habit, and that made me a perfect target for identity theft I didn't know existed. My routines were borrowed. My life was temporarily lived by strangers. My identity became a product sold to people whose purposes I'll never fully understand. And somewhere out there, detailed documentation of who I was and how I lived still exists. A permanent record of vulnerabilities I can never completely eliminate, no matter how much I change or how carefully I vary my patterns now. So I've been putting this off for a while now, but I think I need to tell someone what happened last summer. My so-called therapist says I should write it all down, but I keep cancelling appointments. Talking to a professional feels too official, you know. Like once it's in my records, it's out there forever. But I can't keep it bottled up anymore, so I figured I'd just type it out. This all happened about 8 months ago when I was backpacking through Eastern Europe. I just finished uni and wanted to travel a bit before settling into the whole career thing. I'm not exactly loaded, so I was doing the whole hostel hopping budget travel experience. It was amazing mostly, meeting new people, seeing incredible places, all that. But what happened in Budapest? That's the part I'm still trying to process. I'd been in the city for 3 days staying at this hostel near the Jewish quarter. Nice enough place, but their Wi-Fi was absolute rubbish. I needed to book my next train ticket and check in with my parents, so I headed to this internet cafe about 10 minutes away. The place was a bit of a throwback, honestly, kind of dingy with these partitioned computer stations and outdated PCs, but it was cheap, only about 200 forints per hour, that's like 50 pence, and they had decent coffee. I went in around 7 p.m. after spending the day at the thermal baths. The cafe was pretty quiet, just the owner behind the counter, half asleep, watching something on his phone, and a couple of teenagers playing some online game in the corner. I paid for 2 hours and got assigned to station number 12 near the back wall. When I sat down, I noticed the computer was already on. Not just on, but logged into a browser session. I figured the last person must have just forgotten to log out properly. I was about to close everything and start fresh when I noticed one of the tabs was still loading something. You know when you're a bit nosy about what other people are looking at online? It was like that, just this fleeting curiosity about what the previous user had been browsing. I clicked on the tab, thinking it would be something mundane like Facebook or YouTube. The page that loaded was nothing like that. It took a moment to fully render, but I immediately recognized the browser. It was Tor. I'd never actually used it myself, but I knew what it was for. Accessing the dark web. I'd heard plenty of stories from my friend who studied computer science. All those urban legends about red rooms and black markets. I always thought they were exaggerated, you know. The page itself looked pretty basic. Black background with minimal text. There was a video player in the center that was buffering, and a chat window on the right with messages scrolling by too quickly to read. The video's thumbnail was blurry, but it looked like some kind of room with dim lighting. I should have closed it immediately. That would have been the normal, sensible reaction. But there's this weird thing that happens sometimes. The more you know you shouldn't look at something, the more compelling it becomes. I just sat there, watching the loading circle spin, telling myself I'd close it once I saw what it was, just to satisfy my curiosity. When the video finally loaded, it showed what looked like a basement or cellar. The walls were concrete, and there was a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The room was mostly empty, except for a chair in the middle, and some equipment on the table that I couldn't quite make out. The video quality was poor and grainy, but it was definitely a live stream. There was a timestamp in the corner, and the chat was reacting to something happening. I remember feeling a cold weight in my stomach as as I realized what I might be looking at. This wasn't some fake horror stream or art project. There was something genuinely unsettling about how raw and unproduced it looked. I was about to close the tab when someone entered the frame. A person wearing a plain white mask that covered their entire face. They moved with purpose toward the camera, adjusting it slightly. The movement was so normal, so casual, that it made everything more disturbing somehow. The masked figure then turned to face the camera directly, as if looking right at the viewers. Then they raised their hand and seemed to wave. Not a greeting, but more like they were acknowledging specific people watching. I felt like they were waving at me personally, which is ridiculous, I know. But then they did something that made my blood run cold. They held up a piece of paper with writing on it. The paper had today's date and time, along with the words, "Hello Budapest, Station 12. My station, my exact location. I slammed the laptop closed instinctively, then immediately felt stupid because it wasn't my laptop. The cafe owner glanced over, but quickly went back to his phone. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe the previous user had been chatting with someone and had mentioned their location. Maybe it was some weird coincidence, or I'd misread it in the poor video quality. Taking a deep breath, I reopened the laptop. The browser was still there, but now the video had changed. The camera seemed to be showing a different angle of the same room, but this time focused on the table I'd noticed earlier. On it were various tools, pliers, knives, and other things I didn't want to identify. Next to them was another piece of paper, this one with what looked like a list of usernames or IDs. The chat was going crazy now, messages flying by too fast to read, but certain phrases kept jumping out as they scrolled. Station 12 is watching. We have their IP. Should we send someone? Show them what happens to voyeurs. I tried closing the browser, but it wouldn't respond. I clicked the X repeatedly, then tried Alt F4, then Ctrl Alt Delete. Nothing worked. The screen flickered briefly, and then the video feed changed again. This time, it showed the exterior of a building. With a sickening lurch in my stomach, I recognized it. It was the internet cafe I was sitting in, filmed from across the street. The timestamp showed it was live footage, right now. As I watched, frozen, the camera zoomed in on the windows, panning slowly across until it focused on my station. I could see myself through the window, illuminated by the screen's glow, staring wide-eyed at the monitor. That's when I completely lost it. I jumped up, knocking over my chair, and rushed to the counter. I told the owner there was something wrong with the computer, that I thought it might have been hacked. He just shrugged, clearly not bothered, and said he'd restarted later. I asked him if the previous user had left recently, trying to keep my voice steady. He told me no one had used that station all day. I was the first customer to sit there. I felt physically sick at that point. I grabbed my backpack and headed for the door, glancing across the street to see if anyone was there with a camera. The street was busy with evening traffic and pedestrians, but no one seemed to be filming. As I pushed the door open, my phone buzzed with a notification. A message from an unknown number. Enjoying Budapest, Station 12. We see you. Don't worry about paying for your time. We've taken care of it. We've taken care of everything. I ran all the way back to my hostel without stopping, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I got to my room, I threw my stuff together and checked out immediately, forfeiting the money I'd paid for the next 2 nights. I caught the first train out the next morning to Vienna, and I didn't use a public computer or Wi-Fi for the rest of my trip. For weeks afterwards, I kept getting text messages from different numbers. They were always brief, just enough to let me know I was still being watched. One came through when I was at dinner in Paris. Red wine stains white shirts. Be careful. I'd spilled wine on myself just moments before. Another came when I was back home in London. Your new flat has nice windows, easy to see inside at night. I've moved twice since then. I've gone through every possible explanation for what happened. The most rational one is that someone hacked the computer at the cafe and used its webcam to see me, then used my phone number from the cafe's sign-in system. But that doesn't explain how they're still finding me, or how they know details about my daily life that aren't online. I've changed my phone, my email, even my name on social media. I've installed security systems and keep my curtains closed at all times, but the messages still come through occasionally. The last one arrived yesterday. Miss Budapest, we miss you. Station 12 is always reserved for you. I don't know what these people want or why they chose me. Maybe I just stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. Maybe it was all just an elaborate scare tactic aimed at random dark web voyeurs. But I can't shake the feeling that by clicking that tab, I somehow put myself on a list that I can't get off of. Like by witnessing whatever twisted thing was happening in that basement, I became part of it somehow. So that's my story. I still haven't gone to the police. What would I even tell them? That I accidentally accessed some creepy dark web stream and now I'm being stalked by anonymous messages. They'd think I was paranoid or making it up. I'm telling you this partly as a warning. Be careful about the digital footprints you leave, even ones you don't realize you're creating. That random computer in an internet cafe might not be as anonymous as you think. And if you ever find yourself looking at a browser session someone else left open, just close it. Some nightmares aren't meant to be shared, and once you've seen them, you can't unsee them. I keep thinking about that list of names I glimpsed on the table in the video. I wonder how many others like me are out there, jumping at shadows and changing their phone numbers every few weeks. I wonder if they also made the mistake of clicking on someone else's session, picking up a nightmare that wasn't theirs to begin with. I keep wondering if I should have reported what I found at the pharmacy, but then I remember how normal everything looked on the surface, and I start doubting myself all over again. I work as a dispensary assistant at a small independent pharmacy in Stoke-on-Trent. Nothing glamorous, just checking prescriptions and helping customers find what they need. Been there about 2 years now since I needed something steady after my last job at the call center fell through. Most days are routine. Processing NHS prescriptions, answering questions about over-the-counter medicines, the usual mix of elderly regulars and parents with poorly children. But last month, I started noticing discrepancies in our stock levels that didn't match up with what we'd dispensed according to our computer system. Nothing dramatic, just small quantities of various medications that seemed to be missing without any record of where they'd gone. At first, I assumed it was just accounting errors, or maybe items that had been damaged and written off without proper documentation. Pharmacies handle hundreds of different products, and with multiple staff members processing orders throughout the week, occasional inventory mistakes are inevitable. But when I started paying closer attention to which specific medications were going missing, I noticed they were all items that could be dangerous if used incorrectly, or by people who hadn't been prescribed them. Sedatives, painkillers, even some antipsychotic medications that required careful monitoring by qualified medical professionals. The missing quantities were always small, just a few tablets or capsules from larger containers. But the pattern was consistent enough that it couldn't be explained by normal dispensing errors or accidental damage. Someone was systematically taking small amounts of various controlled medications, probably hoping that the theft would go undetected among normal inventory fluctuations. I tried to research what these specific medications could be used for when combined or administered to people who hadn't been prescribed them, and what I discovered made me deeply uncomfortable. Most could be used to incapacitate people without their knowledge, while others were designed to cause specific behavioral or cognitive changes that would make victims more compliant or less able to resist suggestion. The medication theft wasn't random pilfering by staff members with personal addiction problems. Someone was systematically collecting materials that could be used to drug unsuspecting victims for purposes that range from robbery to much more serious crimes. But understanding what was probably happening didn't immediately help me identify who was responsible or provide clear evidence that would be useful for reporting the theft to management or police. The missing medications could have been taken by any staff member with access to the dispensary, and proving systematic theft would require surveillance or investigation that was beyond my authority as a dispensary assistant. When I tried to research whether similar medication theft was happening at other pharmacies, I found myself following links to websites that specialized in providing information about using pharmaceutical drugs for criminal purposes. The platforms contained detailed guides for administering various medications to unwilling victims, with specific information about dosages, timing, and combinations that would produce desired effects while minimizing the risk of detection. But these weren't theoretical academic discussions about pharmacology. They were practical instruction manuals for people who planned to use stolen medications to incapacitate victims for robbery, sexual assault, or other serious crimes. The casual way these techniques were discussed suggested that systematic medication theft from pharmacies was routine practice for people who needed access to controlled substances for criminal activities. The missing medications from our pharmacy were probably being used to facilitate ongoing crimes against innocent victims who would never understand why they'd experienced unexplained drowsiness, memory problems, or behavioral changes in situations where they should have felt safe. But the most disturbing discovery was that the theft wasn't being conducted by individual criminals acting alone, but was apparently part of organized operations that systematically targeted multiple pharmacies to gather materials needed for various types of criminal activity. The platforms I'd found contained detailed information about which pharmacies were easiest to steal from, which staff members were most likely to notice inventory discrepancies, and even specific techniques for gaining employment at pharmacies to facilitate ongoing theft of controlled medications. I realized that our pharmacy had probably been targeted specifically because our inventory tracking systems were less sophisticated than larger chain operations, making systematic theft more likely to go undetected. But proving this would require access to information and investigation capabilities that weren't available to someone in my position, and reporting my suspicions without concrete evidence might just alert the thieves to modify their methods rather than stopping the criminal activity. Meanwhile, the medication theft was probably continuing, with controlled substances being systematically removed from our stock and used to facilitate crimes against victims throughout the local area. The pharmacy that was supposed to provide safe, regulated access to essential medications had instead become an unwitting supplier for criminal operations that used these same drugs to harm innocent people. When I tried to discuss my concerns with senior staff members, they seemed more worried about the potential impact on our pharmacy's reputation than about the implications of systematic medication theft for public safety. The suggestion that our workplace might be facilitating criminal activity was treated as a problem with my attitude rather than a serious security issue that required investigation and preventive measures. But I remain convinced that the missing medications were being used for harmful purposes, and that our inadequate inventory controls were enabling ongoing criminal activity that affected people throughout the community. Every time I processed prescriptions for the same types of medications that were being systematically stolen, I wondered whether legitimate patients were being denied access to essential treatments because their medications were being diverted to criminal use. The medication theft that had seemed like minor inventory discrepancies had revealed systematic criminal operations that used pharmacy employment and insider access to facilitate serious crimes against unsuspecting victims. But proving the connection between missing medications and criminal activity would require investigation capabilities that were beyond what I could undertake safely, especially since the people responsible had demonstrated sophisticated methods for avoiding detection while maintaining legitimate employment. The controlled substances that were designed to provide safe, effective treatment for people with legitimate medical needs were being systematically diverted to facilitate criminal activities that caused serious harm to innocent victims who never suspected that their drinks, food, or environment had been compromised. When I eventually left that job and moved to a different pharmacy, I made sure to pay careful attention to inventory procedures and security measures, hoping to work somewhere with better controls that would make systematic medication theft more difficult to conduct undetected. I was the one who found the website. That's the part I can't forget, no matter how hard I try. A few years later, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about that night in the hostel and how everything changed when Emily started screaming. I've never spoken about this to anyone, not even to the friends who were there that night. I'm writing this down because keeping it bottled up is slowly destroying me. My girlfriend says I talk in my sleep, muttering about turning it off and just a video. She thinks it's from stress at work, but how do I tell her what we all saw that night? How do I explain that somewhere out there, those videos are still being made, still being watched, and we all just walked away and pretended it never happened? This happened during my gap year after sixth form. I'd been backpacking around Eastern Europe with money I'd saved from working at my local supermarket for 18 months. By October, I'd made my way to Prague, staying in this massive hostel that was popular with British and American backpackers. It was the kind of place where you could always find someone to go drinking with, where people passed through for a few days before moving on to Berlin or Vienna or Budapest. I'd been there about 4 days when I met this group of British students, 2 guys and 3 girls, all from different universities who'd met while traveling. They seemed cool, and we clicked right away over cheap beers in the hostel's common room. They were like most backpackers you meet, open-minded, adventurous, looking for experiences they could tell stories about when they got home. Stories that would make their friends envious of their gap year adventures. On my 5th night, after the hostel bar closed at midnight, we were all a bit drunk, but not ready to sleep. One of the guys, Tom, suggested we go back to their room to keep drinking. They had a 6-bed dorm all to themselves, so there was plenty of space. I remember thinking it was just going to be another night of swapping travel stories and maybe planning a group outing for the next day. The hostel was one of those converted old buildings with thick walls and creaky wooden floors. Their room was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a long hallway lit by these dim yellow lights that made everything look slightly jaundiced. When we got to their room, Tom pulled out his laptop and a bottle of local vodka someone had bought earlier. I should mention that at this point, I still thought this was going to be a normal night. Maybe watch some YouTube videos, share music, typical backpacker bonding stuff. I had no idea Tom was into the dark web, or that he'd been showing the others crazy videos he found there over the past few nights. While Tom set up his laptop, connecting to the hostel Wi-Fi through some VPN he was using, he started telling me about these insane gore videos he'd found. He explained how you needed special browsers to access these sites, how everything was anonymous, how you could find anything if you knew where to look. I remember feeling uncomfortable, but also curious. I'd heard about the dark web before, but had never seen it. The others were clearly already familiar with this routine. They arranged themselves on the bunk beds around Tom's laptop, passing around the vodka bottle. The room was dimly lit, just one small bedside lamp on, which made the laptop screen seem extraordinarily bright. I sat on one of the lower bunks, feeling increasingly uneasy, but not wanting to seem like the prudish one of the group. Tom navigated through what looked like a normal forum, except everything was styled in black and red. The site had a name that was just a string of random letters and numbers. He explained they curated the best extreme videos from around the web. I remember how casually he scrolled through thumbnail images that already looked disturbing, even at that small size. Emily sat beside me on the bunk, while Sophie and Anna were on the opposite bunk. The other guy, Dave, was sitting on the floor next to Tom. There was this weird energy in the room, a mix of nervous excitement and discomfort. Nobody wanted to be the one to say this was too much. Tom clicked on a video titled something like Workshop Fun. The player expanded to fill most of the screen. What we saw started like some kind of amateur horror film. Poor lighting, shaky camera work. Someone in what looked like a workshop or garage. There was a person tied to a chair, wearing what appeared to be a bloody Halloween mask. At least, that's what I told myself it was. The camera moved around this person, showing various tools laid out on a table nearby. Everything looked staged, but in a disturbing way that was trying too hard to be shocking. Tom and Dave were making comments about the fake blood and how you could see the strings when the camera zoomed in. I wanted to believe them, that this was just some extreme version of those fake prank videos you sometimes stumble across online. But then the camera angle changed, and we could see the person's face clearly for the first time. The Halloween mask wasn't a mask at all. It was a real person, gagged and terrified, with what looked like cuts and burns already visible on their face and neck. That's when Emily made this strangled sound next to me. At first, I thought she was just reacting to how graphic the video was turning. We all felt sick watching it. But then she grabbed Tom's arm so hard he spilled vodka on himself. She kept pointing at the screen, not speaking, just making these awful, choked sounds. Tom paused the video, annoyed at first. Emily was shaking, tears streaming down her face as she tried to form words. Finally, she managed to tell us that she recognized the person in the video. It was someone from her hometown, a girl who had gone missing during a backpacking trip through Eastern Europe almost 6 months earlier. The room went completely silent. Tom immediately closed the laptop, but it was too late. We'd all seen it. We'd all recognized the moment Emily had. This wasn't some fake gore video made for shock value. This was real footage of a real person who had really gone missing. What followed was chaos. Sophie started crying. Dave was saying it couldn't be the same person, that Emily was mistaken. Anna was frantically texting someone on her phone. Tom just sat there staring at his closed laptop like it might explode. I felt physically sick, like the floor was tilting beneath me. My mind kept replaying that moment when I realized we weren't watching a sick prank or an amateur horror film. We were watching someone's actual suffering, someone Emily knew personally, and the timestamp on the video was from 3 months ago. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Tom reopened his laptop. Instead of going back to the video, he started deleting his browsing history, clearing caches, removing whatever software he'd been using. His hands were shaking so badly, he kept mistyping. Dave was helping him, both of them muttering about IP addresses and how we could all get in trouble for accessing the site. Emily wanted to go to the police, but Tom and Dave were adamant that we couldn't. They argued that we'd be implicated for accessing the dark web, that we could be considered suspects since we'd clearly been looking for violent content. Sophie sided with them, terrified of getting in trouble. Anna just kept saying we should leave Prague immediately. I just sat there, paralyzed with indecision. Part of me knew Emily was right. We had to report what we'd seen, but another part was selfishly worried about the consequences. Would I be detained in a foreign country? Would this follow me forever? Would my parents find out I'd been watching disgusting videos on the dark web? In the end, we made a decision that haunts me every day. We agreed to say nothing. Tom completely wiped his laptop, even running some program that supposedly overwrote the hard drive multiple times. We all swore to never speak of it again. The next morning, the group checked out of the hostel. I stayed another day, unable to face them at breakfast. Emily had been crying all night. I could hear her through the walls. When I finally left Prague, I went south instead of east as I'd planned, wanting to put as much distance between myself and the memory of that night as possible. But here's the thing I can't stop thinking about. Someone is making those videos. Someone is filming them. Someone is uploading them. And people like us are watching them, telling themselves it's not real, that it's just extreme entertainment. Until that night, I could pretend the dark web was just an urban legend, a story about a hidden part of the internet where terrible things happen. But I've seen it now. I've seen how thin the line is between curiosity and complicity. I've seen how easy it is to become part of something horrific without even realizing it until it's too late. Sometimes I look up the case of the missing girl from Emily's hometown. There's still a Facebook page dedicated to finding her, run by her parents. They post updates on the anniversary of her disappearance, begging for information. They don't know what happened to their daughter. They don't know that 7 strangers in a Prague hostel saw her final moments and said nothing. I don't know what happened to the others after that night. We disconnected completely. No social media, no exchange numbers. It was like we all wanted to erase each other along with the memory. But I wonder if they have the same nightmares I do. I wonder if Emily ever went to the police on her own. I wonder if Tom still browses those sites, telling himself it's all fake. And I wonder about something else, something that keeps me awake at night. When Tom was scrolling through that site, I saw dozens of thumbnail images of other videos, dozens of other victims. How many of them were real people with families searching for them? How many disappeared without a trace, only to end up as entertainment for people like us, drinking in hostels and looking for a thrill? I still travel sometimes, but I never stay in hostels. I can't stand the thought of those communal spaces, those rooms full of strangers, all with their own secrets and browsing histories. Every time I see someone hunched over a laptop with their screen angled away, I wonder what they're watching. Every time I hear about a missing backpacker, I think about that night. The dark web isn't some separate world that exists apart from ours. It's here, bleeding into our reality every day. People disappear, videos appear. And somewhere in Prague, in a hostel room that's been cleaned and rented thousands of times since that night, 7 people became part of something they can never undo, no matter how hard they try to delete it. I should probably admit something right from the start. I agreed to help my brother because I wanted to feel useful again. That's the pathetic truth of it. 3 months unemployed after the bakery closed down, sitting around my flat feeling sorry for myself. And when Danny called asking for computer help, I jumped at the chance to do something that mattered. I told myself I was being a good sister, helping family when they needed it most. But really, I was just desperate to feel competent at something again. That desperation has cost me my peace of mind, my sense of security, and probably a lot more besides. I'm writing this from a Premier Inn in Birmingham, having left my flat in the middle of the night with nothing but a rucksack and my savings, because I finally understand what I helped my brother access, what I made possible, and I'm terrified of what might happen now that I know too much. Danny had always been the clever one in the family. the one who understood technology and business, while I learned to knead dough and operate industrial ovens. But cleverness can be dangerous when it leads you into places you don't belong, and my brother had always been too curious for his own good. He called me on a Tuesday evening in October, sounding more stressed than I'd heard him in years. He'd been working on what he called a freelance research project, something that required accessing websites that weren't available through normal internet searches. He'd managed to set up the necessary software, but was having trouble navigating the technical requirements. The job paid well, he explained, and he desperately needed the income. His marketing consultancy had been struggling since the recession, and this research work was keeping him afloat financially. All he needed was someone to help him understand how to access specific websites and download certain files. I should have asked more questions about what kind of research required such unusual internet access. Should have wondered why legitimate work would need to be conducted through hidden websites that most people didn't even know existed. But Danny sounded so desperate, and I was flattered that he thought I could help with something technical. The next evening, I went round to his house in Kenilworth to see what he was struggling with. He'd already installed the necessary software but was having trouble understanding how to use it effectively. The interface was confusing, nothing like the normal web browsers we were used to. It took me most of the evening to work out the basics, but eventually we managed to access the hidden websites Danny needed for his research. The whole system seemed needlessly complicated, but I assumed that was just how these privacy tools worked. The websites themselves looked basic compared to normal internet sites. Simple layouts, minimal graphics, mostly text-based content. Danny explained that his research involved gathering information from discussion groups and databases that weren't indexed by search engines. Over the following weeks, I helped him navigate these sites whenever he got stuck with technical problems. It became a regular arrangement. He'd call when he needed assistance, and I'd come over to help him access specific pages or download particular files. I was curious about the research itself, but Danny was vague about the details. He said his client valued discretion, and he couldn't discuss the specific subject matter. Something to do with market research and consumer behavior, he claimed, though the websites we were accessing didn't look like they contained commercial information. The first sign something wasn't right was when I noticed the types of files Danny was downloading. They weren't research documents or market reports, but photographs and personal information about specific individuals. When I asked about this, he explained that his client was investigating potential employees and needed comprehensive background checks. That seemed plausible enough, though I was surprised by the level of personal detail being gathered. The files contained information about people's daily routines, family relationships, even financial circumstances, more detailed than any legitimate employment background check would require. But I was enjoying the regular visits to Danny's house and the feeling that I was helping with important work. After months of unemployment, it was gratifying to feel needed and competent at something, even if I didn't fully understand what we were accomplishing. The research requests became more specific over time. Instead of general background information, Danny's client began asking for details about particular individuals' vulnerabilities, their fears, their secrets, their potential pressure points. When I questioned the appropriateness of gathering such personal information, Danny assured me it was all legal and above board. He showed me the client communications, which seemed professional enough. The requests were always couched in business language about risk assessment and due diligence. But reading between the lines, it was clear that someone was building detailed psychological profiles of people who had no idea they were being investigated. I should have refused to continue helping at that point. should have recognized that legitimate research doesn't require such invasive intelligence gathering about private individuals. But Danny was paying me a small fee for my technical assistance, and I needed the money more than I cared to admit. The breakthrough came when I recognized one of the research targets. It was Sarah, a woman who worked at the coffee shop near my flat. I knew her fairly well from regular visits over the past 2 years. She was friendly, hard-working, and studying part-time to become a teacher. The file Danny was compiling about Sarah contained frighteningly personal information. Details about her work schedule, her college timetable, even her route home from the bus stop. Someone had been systematically observing her daily routine and documenting her movements with methodical precision. But it was the psychological profile that really disturbed me. The file included assessments of Sarah's personality traits, her emotional vulnerabilities, even speculation about her romantic relationships and family dynamics. This wasn't employment background checking. It was preparation for something much more sinister. When I confronted Danny about what we were really doing, he became defensive and evasive. He insisted that the research was legitimate, that his client had valid reasons for gathering such detailed information, but he couldn't explain why a simple background check would require knowledge of someone's daily fears and emotional weaknesses. I threatened to stop helping unless he told me the truth about what the research was being used for. That's when he finally admitted that his client wasn't conducting employment screening. They were providing intelligence services to people who wanted detailed information about specific individuals for unstated purposes. Danny claimed he didn't know what the client ultimately did with the research, but it was obvious he suspected the information was being used for harassment or stalking. He justified his involvement by saying he was just gathering publicly available information, that he wasn't responsible for how it was used. But I knew that wasn't true. The information in these files could only have been obtained through systematic surveillance and investigation. Someone was paying Danny to facilitate stalking campaigns, and I'd been helping him do it without understanding the consequences. I demanded that he stop accepting these research requests and delete all the files we'd compiled. Danny refused, claiming he couldn't afford to lose the income and that someone else would do the work if he didn't. He tried to minimize my concerns by suggesting that information gathering wasn't inherently harmful. That's when I realized my brother had become someone I didn't recognize. The financial pressure had compromised his moral judgment, and he was willing to facilitate serious crimes against innocent people, rather than face economic hardship. I stopped helping him and tried to put the whole experience behind me, but I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah and the other people whose lives we documented in such invasive detail. I started paying closer attention to her behavior when I visited the coffee shop, looking for signs that she was being harassed or followed. It didn't take long to notice changes. Sarah seemed more nervous than usual, constantly checking over her shoulder and jumping at unexpected sounds. She'd started varying her route home from work and seemed reluctant to stay late for closing duties. Someone was clearly making her feel unsafe. I considered warning her about the research file, but how do you tell someone that your brother has been paid to compile a stalking manual about their daily life? How do you explain your own complicity in gathering the intelligence that was now being used to terrorize them? Instead, I decided to investigate who Danny's client actually was and what they were doing with the information we'd provided. I used the same hidden websites we'd been accessing for research, following the digital trail, back to see where the requests were originating. What I discovered was a marketplace where people could commission detailed surveillance reports about anyone they chose. The clients weren't employers or private investigators. They were stalkers, harassers, and worse. People who wanted to terrorize specific individuals but needed intelligence about their targets' routines and vulnerabilities. The research Danny had been conducting was being sold to the highest bidder, with no screening of the buyers or oversight of how the information was used. We'd been feeding intelligence into a system that facilitated serious crimes against vulnerable people. Some of the completed research files had been used for elaborate stalking campaigns that had driven victims from their homes and jobs. Others had enabled harassment so severe that several targets had required police protection. A few had even been connected to physical assaults, where the attackers had used detailed intelligence about their victims' routines and psychology. I tried contacting Danny to explain what I'd discovered, but he refused to discuss it further. He claimed he was just providing a service that was in demand, that he wasn't responsible for criminal misuse of information. When I threatened to report his activities to the police, he reminded me that I'd been complicit in gathering much of the intelligence myself. That's when I understood the trap I'd fallen into. My desire to feel useful had made me an accessory to systematic stalking and harassment. I couldn't expose Danny's activities without implicating myself, and I couldn't protect his victims without admitting my own role in facilitating their persecution. I started monitoring the hidden websites regularly, looking for signs that the research targets were being harmed. Found several news reports that seemed connected to intelligence we'd gathered. Break-ins at addresses we'd surveilled. Harassment campaigns against people whose psychological profiles we'd compiled. Even a few cases where victims had been approached by strangers who demonstrated intimate knowledge of their personal lives. Each report made me feel sicker about what I'd been part of. I'd thought I was helping my brother with legitimate research work, but I'd actually been enabling crimes against innocent people who had done nothing except catch the attention of someone willing to pay for detailed intelligence about their lives. The situation became personal when I found my own name on one of the research request lists. Someone had commissioned a detailed surveillance report about me, probably because they'd identified my connection to Danny's intelligence gathering operation. The request specified the same level of invasive investigation that we'd conducted on other targets. Daily routine mapping, psychological profiling, vulnerability assessment. Someone wanted to know everything about my life, my habits, my weaknesses. I realized I was now in the same position as Sarah and the other people we'd researched. My privacy had been violated, my safety had been compromised, and there was nothing I could do about it through normal legal channels. That's when I decided to disappear. Not permanently, but long enough to break the surveillance pattern and hopefully discourage whoever was interested in my activities. I withdrew my savings, packed essential belongings, and left Coventry without telling anyone where I was going. The irony isn't lost on me. I've become a victim of the same system I helped create. The intelligence gathering techniques I learned while helping Danny are now being used against me by people who see me as a security threat or a source of information. I keep thinking about Sarah and wondering if she's managed to escape whatever harassment campaign was planned against her. About all the other targets whose files we compiled. All the innocent people whose lives we documented for criminal purposes. The hidden websites are still active, still facilitating the trade in personal intelligence that makes modern stalking so effective. Danny is probably still accepting research requests, still gathering invasive information about people who don't know they're being watched. And I'm sitting in this anonymous hotel room, afraid to go home, afraid to contact friends or family, afraid to establish any routine that might make me predictable to whoever has commissioned intelligence gathering about my life. The most frightening thing is how easy it all was, how a few hours of technical assistance could facilitate systematic violations of privacy and safety, how the desire to feel useful could be manipulated into complicity with serious crimes. I suppose this is what happens when technology outpaces our understanding of its implications, when the tools that were designed to protect privacy get turned into weapons for destroying it, when the interconnected world we've created becomes a hunting ground where anyone can become prey. All I wanted was to help my brother and feel competent at something again. Instead, I've learned that good intentions can be weaponized, that family loyalty can be exploited, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is try to be helpful without understanding the full consequences of your assistance. Now I just have to hope that whoever is researching me will lose interest before they gather enough intelligence to make me genuinely vulnerable. And I have to live with knowing that my desire to feel useful has probably contributed to the suffering of people I'll never meet. People whose only crime was existing in a world where privacy has become a commodity to be bought and sold. Picture this. You're going through life, you have a few close friends, you're relatively happy and all is well. Then, one day, you borrow your neighbor's internet connection and it changes everything. You never imagined it would lead you into the darkest corners of human behavior, that a simple act of digital trespassing could make you a witness to things that happen every day, just out of sight of people like us. I'm a night shift worker at a 24-hour Tesco in Birmingham. Have been for the past 2 years, stocking shelves and dealing with the occasional drunk customer between midnight and 8 in the morning. It's not glamorous work, but it pays enough to cover the rent on my studio flat and leaves my days free for sleeping and not much else. The internet in my building has always been unreliable. The landlord installed the cheapest possible broadband years ago and hasn't upgraded it since. Most evenings when I'm trying to unwind before work, the connection drops out completely or slows to the point where even basic websites won't load properly. Around Christmas last year, I noticed that one of my neighbors had left their Wi-Fi network unsecured. The signal was strong enough to reach my flat, and the connection speed was significantly better than what I was paying for. I told myself I'd only use it temporarily, just until I could sort out proper internet service for myself. The network was called Deep Access 01, which seemed like an odd name for a home connection, but I didn't think much of it at the time. People choose strange names for their networks. I've seen everything from FBI surveillance van to pretty fly for a Wi-Fi in my building. For several weeks, everything worked perfectly. Better than perfectly, actually. The connection was faster and more stable than any internet service I'd ever used. I could stream videos without buffering, download files in seconds, browse multiple websites simultaneously without any noticeable slowdown. It was during one of these late-night browsing sessions that I first encountered something unusual. I was looking through Reddit, jumping between different communities, when I clicked on a link that seemed to take longer than usual to load. When the page finally appeared, it wasn't what I'd expected. Instead of the typical Reddit interface, I was looking at what appeared to be a directory listing. Rows of folders and files with cryptic names organized by date and time. It looked like the back end of a website, the kind of administrative interface that normal users aren't supposed to see. I assumed I'd clicked on a broken link or encountered some sort of server error, tried refreshing the page, but got a different view of the same type of directory structure. Different files, different folders, but the same basic layout. Most of the folder names were meaningless combinations of letters and numbers, but a few had descriptions that caught my attention. Things like archive sessions and live feeds and request queue. The file sizes were enormous, much larger than typical documents or images. Curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on one of the folders labeled Archive Sessions. What opened was another directory, this one containing video files. Hundreds of them, organized by date and numbered sequentially. The file names didn't provide any information about their content, just timestamps and reference numbers. I selected one at random and clicked on it. The video opened in a basic media player, no fancy interface or streaming platform branding, just a simple window with standard playback controls. The video quality was surprisingly good, much better than I'd expected for files that seemed to be stored on someone's personal server. The content showed what looked like a basement or cellar. Concrete walls, minimal lighting, basic furniture. Someone was sitting in a chair in the center of the frame, though the image quality made it difficult to make out specific details about them. I watched for several minutes, waiting for something to happen. The person in the chair appeared to be unconscious or sleeping. No one else was visible in the frame, and there was no audio beyond a faint ambient hum. Eventually, I got bored and tried a different file. This one showed a different location, what might have been a garage or workshop. Similar setup, different person, same lack of activity. I began to suspect these were test recordings or placeholder content for some sort of streaming service. Over the next few evenings, I explored more of the directory structure, found folders containing what appeared to be live streaming software, payment processing systems, user management databases, everything you'd need to run a professional video platform, but hosted on what seemed to be a residential internet connection. The live streaming folder was particularly interesting. It contained software I'd never heard of, applications designed for anonymous broadcasting over encrypted networks. The documentation mentioned compatibility with Tor and other privacy-focused systems. That's when I started to understand what I was looking at. This wasn't just someone's personal media collection. This was the infrastructure for a dark web streaming service, the kind of platform I'd read about in forums, but assumed were mostly urban legends. I should have stopped exploring at that point. Should have disconnected from the network and pretended I'd never seen any of it. Instead, I kept digging deeper. Found a folder labeled Current Operations that contained what appeared to be real-time data. Server logs, user statistics, financial records. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of users, hundreds of thousands of pounds in cryptocurrency transactions, server costs that would make most small businesses bankrupt. The user logs showed people connecting from all over the world, accessing content at all hours of the day and night. The financial records indicated that viewers were paying significant amounts to access premium content, with additional fees for what the system described as interactive services. But it was the content scheduling system that made everything clear. A calendar showing planned streaming sessions, each one tagged with location details, participant information, and viewer capacity limits. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, like something you'd see in a corporate project management system. Except the projects being managed were real people, and the calendar showed that a session was scheduled to begin in less than an hour. I found the live streaming interface and accessed it using credentials I discovered in one of the configuration files. The platform looked professional, with a clean user interface and robust streaming capabilities. There was a chat system, payment processing, viewer analytics, everything you'd expect from a legitimate streaming service. The scheduled session appeared in the interface as Location 7, Premium Interactive, max 50 viewers. The stream wasn't active yet, but there was a countdown timer showing roughly 40 minutes until it began. I waited, telling myself I was just curious about the technical aspects of how such a system might work, that I was investigating out of professional interest, not personal entertainment. When the timer reached 0, the stream activated automatically. The video showed a room I hadn't seen in any of the archived files. Looked like someone's living room, complete with family photos, children's toys scattered about, the kind of domestic space where normal people lived normal lives. A man sat on the sofa, facing the camera. He was clearly awake and aware, looking directly into the lens with an expression I'd never seen before. Not quite fear, not quite resignation, but something in between that suggested he understood exactly what was about to happen. The chat system activated as soon as the stream began. Messages appeared from viewers around the world, most of them numbers and brief phrases in various languages. Within minutes, there were nearly 50 people watching, all of them typing commands and instructions. That's when I realized what I was witnessing. This wasn't just a streaming service. It was an interactive platform where viewers could direct what happened to real people in real time. The chat messages weren't comments, they were orders. Someone entered the frame from off camera. They were holding what looked like a tablet device, which they showed to the man on the sofa. He read whatever was displayed on the screen, and his expression changed from resignation to genuine terror. The chat messages became more frequent and specific. I started to understand that the viewers were voting on what should happen next, with the most popular suggestions being implemented by whoever was operating the camera. The man on the sofa looked directly at the camera again, and I realized he could see the viewer count. He knew exactly how many people were watching, knew that dozens of strangers were deciding his fate through an anonymous chat system. I closed the browser and unplugged my computer from the wall. Spent the next 3 days calling in sick to work, barely leaving my flat, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen was some sort of elaborate performance art or psychological experiment. The production values had been too professional, the technical infrastructure too sophisticated for something genuinely criminal. But I couldn't stop thinking about the man's expression when he'd read that tablet, the way he'd looked through the camera, as if he could see directly to the people controlling what happened to him. Eventually, I contacted my internet service provider and arranged for proper broadband installation. Stopped using my neighbor's connection entirely, though I never figured out which flat it was coming from. The building has 12 units, and I've never been social enough with the other residents to know who might be running that kind of operation. I moved out 2 months later, found a different flat across town, told myself it was for completely unrelated reasons, better neighborhood, shorter commute to work, that sort of thing. But moving doesn't change what you know, and the questions followed me to the new address. Had I witnessed something real, or had I stumbled across an elaborate piece of interactive fiction? How do you verify something that exists entirely in the shadows, that leaves no trace in the legitimate world? That was nearly a year ago. I still work the night shift at Tesco, still live alone in a studio flat, still spend my evenings browsing the internet before work. But I've become much more careful about which networks I connect to, which links I click, which rabbit holes I'm willing to explore. Sometimes, usually when I'm stocking shelves during the quiet hours between 3 and 5 in the morning, I'll think about that countdown timer, about the professionalism of that streaming platform, the sophistication of the user interface, the global audience participating in real-time decision-making. The worst part isn't wondering whether what I saw was genuine. The worst part is knowing that somewhere right now, similar platforms are operating with similar audiences. And people like that man on the sofa are looking into cameras just like that one. And sometimes I wonder if my access to that network was really accidental. Whether someone in my building noticed my internet usage patterns and deliberately left their connection unsecured. knowing that someone like me would eventually find what they wanted me to find. Whether I was supposed to discover that platform, supposed to witness what I witnessed, supposed to carry that knowledge forward into my ordinary life as a night shift worker in Birmingham. I've never told anyone about this. Not colleagues, not friends, not the authorities. What would I say? That I used someone else's Wi-Fi and found something that might have been real? That I watched something terrible happen and then disconnected? But I'm telling you now, and I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because the weight of keeping it secret has become too much. Maybe because sharing it might somehow make it less real, less immediate, less present in my thoughts during those quiet hours at work. Or maybe because I've started to suspect that creating witnesses was always the point. That platforms like that don't just exist to serve their paying customers, but to generate people like me who carry the knowledge of what's possible in the spaces between legitimate internet services. People who understand that the surface web is exactly that, a surface, concealing activities that most people never imagine are happening, right alongside their Netflix subscriptions and social media feeds. Maybe by telling you this, I'm doing exactly what whoever runs Deep Access, 01, intended from the beginning. Maybe that's how these things spread and survive, through stories told by people who stumbled across them accidentally and can never quite forget what they saw. Maybe the real product isn't the streams themselves, but witnesses like me who carry the knowledge forward, who plant seeds of awareness in the minds of people who might otherwise never imagine such things exist. I still live in the same city, still work the same shifts, still browse the internet during my free time. But I've never again seen a network called Deep Access 01, and I've never again found directory structures like the ones I explored that winter. Sometimes I wonder if they're still operating from somewhere in my old building, still running streams for global audiences, still creating new witnesses who will carry their own versions of this story forward. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone with my computer, I catch myself looking for unsecured networks, wondering what I might find if I started exploring again. That's perhaps the most disturbing part of all. Not the horror of what I witnessed, but the lingering curiosity about what else might be out there, just a few clicks away from the ordinary internet that most people think they know. I got this second-hand Fire Stick from Facebook Marketplace about 4 months ago, and I'm still having nightmares about what I found on it. I haven't told anyone the full story until now. My friend suggested therapy, but I can't imagine explaining this to a professional without them either reporting me to the police or thinking I'm completely unhinged. I just need to get this off my chest somehow, and writing it down anonymously seems like the safest option. I've always been into finding ways to watch content without paying for a million different streaming subscriptions. I'm not particularly tech savvy, but I can follow instructions from YouTube tutorials well enough. Last October, I was between jobs and trying to save money wherever I could. My old Fire Stick had started glitching, and I couldn't afford a new one, so I checked Facebook Marketplace. I found someone selling a fully loaded Fire Stick for £30, which seemed like a decent deal. The seller was this ordinary-looking bloke who lived in a flat about 20 minutes from me in Birmingham. He seemed normal enough, just a regular guy in his 30s trying to make some extra cash. He explained that he'd upgraded to a newer model and didn't need this one anymore. He mentioned it was jailbroken and had all the good stuff on it already. I figured he meant the usual pirated streaming apps, which was exactly what I was after. I brought it home that evening and plugged it into my TV. The interface looked different from standard Fire Sticks, with a custom background and loads of apps I didn't recognize. There were the usual suspects like Kodi and various movie streaming apps, but also a bunch of oddly named folders. One was simply labeled Premium, and another called Hidden Shows. I assumed these were just more pirated content, maybe organized by genre or something. That night, I settled in with a beer and some leftover pizza, ready for a lazy evening of browsing through all the new content I had access to. I spent about an hour exploring the different apps, finding the usual pirated films and TV shows. It was exactly what I'd expected, nothing particularly unusual. Around midnight, with nothing better to do, I decided to check out the Hidden Shows folder, expecting to find porn, or maybe some obscure foreign films. When I clicked on it, I was taken to a screen that looked almost like a video conferencing setup. There were thumbnails of what appeared to be different camera feeds, each with a title like Room 1, Room 2, and so on. Some had additional labels like Active or Scheduled. I remember thinking it looked like some kind of reality TV setup, maybe some underground streaming service showing unedited footage from shows around the world. There was even a viewer count next to each thumbnail, showing how many people were currently watching. I scrolled through the options, curiosity getting the better of me. Most of the rooms showed empty spaces, what looked like bedrooms, living areas, or nondescript rooms with various furnishings. Some had people in them, just doing everyday things like using computers or watching TV. It reminded me of those webcam sites from the early 2000s where people would just broadcast their daily lives. Weird, but not exactly alarming. Then I noticed one labeled Red Room Live Now, with a significantly higher viewer count than the others. I'd heard the term Red Room before in discussions about the dark web, but I'd always dismissed them as urban legends, fictional horror stories people made up to seem edgy online. I figured this was probably just named that for shock value, perhaps showing a room with red lighting or decoration to seem mysterious. I clicked on it, and at first the stream was dark and grainy. I could make out what looked like a basement or garage with concrete walls. It took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust to the dim lighting. There was a person sitting in a chair in the center of the frame, facing away from the camera. Another figure moved around the edges of the room, mostly out of frame. I almost clicked away, thinking it was just some amateur horror streaming channel trying to be creepy. But then the second figure stepped fully into view. They were wearing a plain white mask and surgical gloves. Something about their deliberate movements made my stomach clench. This didn't look like someone playing a role. They moved with purpose, arranging items on a small table just at the edge of the frame. The person in the chair was completely still, and I noticed their hands appeared to be secured to the armrest. I should have closed the app immediately. Any reasonable person would have. But there's this horrible compulsion that comes with witnessing something so outside your normal experience, a need to confirm what you're seeing is real before you can react to it. I kept watching, telling myself it must be some kind of extreme performance art or an elaborate prank. The masked figure turned toward the camera and made a small gesture, almost like a bow. Then they held up a piece of paper with what looked like a username and a timestamp. With a sickening lurch, I realized this was happening in real time. This wasn't recorded footage. The timestamp showed the current date and time, just minutes ago. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. The masked figure picked up something from the table, a knife that caught the dim light, and turned to the person in the chair. I won't describe the details of what I witnessed. I can't bring myself to put it into words, and I don't want to traumatize anyone else with those images. But it wasn't fake. The sounds, the movements, the reactions. There was no mistaking this for fiction or acting. I finally managed to close the app, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the remote twice. I unplugged the Fire Stick and sat in the dark, trying to process what I'd just seen. Part of me wanted to believe it was an elaborate hoax, some shocking viral marketing stunt. But deep down, I knew better. What I had witnessed was real violence, real suffering, broadcast for entertainment. I spent the rest of the night in a daze, alternating between nausea and panic. By morning, I convinced myself I needed to go to the police. I plugged the Fire Stick back in, intending to document what I had found so I would have evidence. But when it booted up, the interface had changed. The custom background was gone, replaced by the standard Amazon home screen. The folders and strange apps had vanished. It looked like a completely normal Fire Stick, freshly reset to factory settings. I searched through every menu and setting, looking for any trace of what I'd seen the night before, but there was nothing. Had I imagined it all? Had I fallen asleep and dreamed the whole horrible experience? I knew I hadn't, but the complete disappearance of any evidence made me question my own sanity. I decided to contact the seller. I found our Facebook conversation and messaged him, asking casually about some of the apps that had been on the Fire Stick, specifically mentioning the hidden shows folder. Hours passed with no response. By evening, I discovered he'd blocked me. His marketplace listings had been taken down, and when I searched for his profile, it no longer existed. Over the next few days, I tried to research what I'd seen. I learned about actual red rooms on the dark web, illegal live streams where viewers paid to watch, or even direct acts of violence against captive victims. Most sources claimed they were just myths, that the dark web wasn't actually capable of supporting the kind of streaming quality needed for live video. But I knew what I'd seen. I eventually gathered the courage to go to the police, but with no evidence and a story that sounded completely far-fetched. They didn't take me seriously. They took a statement and said they'd look into it, but I could tell from their expressions that they thought I was either making it up or had been watching some extreme horror film and confused it with reality. For weeks afterward, I was terrified to use any internet-connected device. I threw the Fire Stick in a skip far from my flat and bought a new TV, paranoid that somehow the previous one had been compromised. I changed all my passwords and even moved to a different flat, telling myself it was because I'd found a better place. But really, it was because I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. What disturbs me most is not just what I saw, but the realization that there were dozens, maybe hundreds, of viewers watching the same stream. Regular people with internet connections and devices, sitting in their homes, willingly watching someone suffer. How many of them thought it was fake? How many knew it was real and watched anyway? And how had I, with nothing but a second-hand Fire Stick, stumbled across something that was supposedly impossible to find without special browsers and technical knowledge? I still wonder about that masked figure. Did they know I was watching? Was the Fire Stick reset remotely when they somehow detected I wasn't a regular viewer? And what about the seller? Was he involved? Or just another unwitting middleman passing along something he didn't fully understand? It's been 4 months now, and sometimes I almost convince myself it never happened. But then I'll see something. A white mask in a shop window, a certain quality of light in a dark room, and it all comes flooding back. The worst part is knowing that right now, someone somewhere might be watching another stream, treating real horror and suffering as entertainment, and doing nothing to stop it. I don't know what more I could have done. I don't know what more I should do now. But I know that those hidden shows are still out there, still streaming, still claiming victims. And I know that sometimes the darkest parts of the web find their way into our homes through the most ordinary of devices, blurring the line between digital and real-world horror until it disappears completely. Everyone has a shadow self, the person we become when no one is watching. when the mask slips and our private thoughts emerge. I always considered mine relatively harmless. Late-night rabbit holes of research on obscure topics, occasionally watching people in cafes, imagining their lives, sometimes typing out angry emails I'd never send. Normal stuff. At least that's what I told myself. I teach digital media studies at a mid-tier university. It's not groundbreaking work, but it keeps me engaged, analyzing how technology shapes communication, behavior, and culture. My research specialty is online community formation, particularly around niche interests. This focus has taken me to some fascinating corners of the internet over the years, though always as an academic observer rather than a participant. 3 months ago, I began a new research project on anonymity and digital identity. The plan was straightforward. Examine how people behave differently in spaces where their real-world identity is disconnected from their online actions. I focused initially on anonymous forums, encrypted messaging platforms, and identity-obscuring applications. Standard academic research conducted within ethical guidelines, with IRB approval and proper protocols. What I didn't include in my research proposal was my growing curiosity about truly anonymous spaces, the layers of the internet inaccessible through standard browsers. I had read the academic literature on so-called dark web networks, understood their legitimate uses for privacy-conscious users, journalists, and dissidents, but I had never actually navigated those spaces myself. It represented a gap in my experiential knowledge, one that increasingly felt like a limitation in my research. So I installed a specialized browser, followed basic security protocols, and began exploring. The experience was initially underwhelming. The dark web resembled the early internet. Text-heavy pages with minimal design, slow loading times, frequent dead links. Most sites were marketplaces for illicit goods, financial services operating outside regulation, or forums discussing privacy technology and philosophy. Nothing particularly shocking or unexpected. About 2 weeks into my exploration, I discovered a subforum dedicated to discussing something called experience rooms. The conversation was deliberately vague, full of insider terminology and oblique references. Members debated the authenticity of various rooms, sharing technical criteria for evaluating legitimacy, but never explicitly stating what these rooms actually contained. The ambiguity intrigued me professionally. It was a perfect example of how communities develop coded language to both include insiders and exclude outsiders. One username appeared consistently in these discussions: Analyst Prime. Unlike most participants who either celebrated or debunked various rooms, Analyst Prime took a clinical, almost academic approach. They discussed psychological profiles of viewers and subjects, reference engagement metrics and response patterns, and occasionally mentioned a research framework they had developed. Their posts contained the kind of analytical language I might use in my own academic work, which perhaps explains why I found them credible when others seemed like sensationalists. After observing the forum for several days, I sent Analyst Prime a private message explaining my research interest in anonymous communities and asking for clarification about these experience rooms they discuss so analytically. I expected to be ignored or rebuffed. Instead, I received a prompt response asking about my academic background and research methodologies. We exchanged several messages discussing psychology, digital ethnography, and observation bias. Analyst Prime eventually explained that experience rooms were live streaming platforms where viewers could observe people in various situations without the subject's knowledge. Most were fraudulent, pre-recorded content or paid actors pretending to be unwitting participants, but some, they claimed, were genuine. Analyst Prime described themselves as a behavioral researcher studying the psychology of both the observers and the observed in these environments. They offered to show me an authentic room for academic purposes. I should have declined. I should have ended the conversation, deleted the browser, and continued my research through legitimate channels. Instead, I told myself this was a unique research opportunity, a chance to understand a digital phenomenon firsthand, rather than through second-hand accounts. Analyst Prime sent me an address and access credentials for what they called an observation session, scheduled for 2 a.m. the following night. They explained that this particular stream would be appropriate for a first-time academic observer. No illegal activities, no explicit content, just authentic human behavior under observation conditions. They recommended I prepare by reading several psychological papers on voyeurism and surveillance effects, which they linked to normal web academic repositories. The legitimacy of these references lowered my guard further. At 1:55 a.m., sitting in my darkened home office, I accessed the address using the credentials provided. The site had a minimalist interface, black background, a video player in the center, a data panel to the right showing various metrics, and a small text field below for observer notes. No chat function, no visible usernames of other viewers. The video initially showed an empty room, white walls, hardwood floor, a single chair in the center. A timer in the corner indicated the stream would begin in 5 minutes. While waiting, I examined the data panel. It displayed numerous metrics. Current viewer count, 17. Average heart rate of viewers, 72 beats per minute. Average pupillary response, estimated engagement levels, and something labeled empathic resonance score. The sophistication of the analytics suggested serious technology behind what appeared visually to be a simple streaming setup. At precisely 2 a.m., a person entered the frame and sat in the chair. They were ordinary looking, dressed in casual clothes, their face visible but unremarkable. They seemed unaware of the camera, occasionally checking their phone or adjusting their position in the chair. Nothing dramatic or unusual happened. They simply sat, waited, occasionally showing signs of mild impatience or boredom. 10 minutes into this uneventful stream, I noticed changes in the metrics panel. Viewer heart rates had increased slightly. The empathic resonance score was rising. Most notably, my own heart was beating faster despite the mundane scene. A new metric appeared. Anticipation factor, 78%. I couldn't understand why watching someone simply sitting would generate anticipation, yet I felt it too, a growing tension without clear cause. After 20 minutes, the person in the chair checked their watch, stood up, and walked out of frame. The room remained empty for approximately 30 seconds. Then a different person entered and sat down. This new individual also seemed unaware of being recorded, also checked their phone periodically, also displayed mild impatience. The same scenario repeated with no significant variation. What changed dramatically were the metrics. Viewer heart rates increased further. Pupillary response showed significant dilation. The empathic resonance score dropped while anticipation factor rose to 91%. My own physiological response matched these trends. I felt tense, expectant, though nothing objectively tension-inducing was occurring. I recognized this as a conditioned response. Something about this particular setup, an ordinary person waiting alone in a room, had trained regular viewers to anticipate something significant. After 15 minutes, the second person left just as the first had done. The room remained empty again, briefly, before a third individual entered. As this pattern continued, I began to see subtle differences in how each person behaved in the apparently identical situation. Some seemed relaxed, others visibly anxious. Some checked the time frequently, others seemed content to wait. The observer's metrics fluctuated with each new subject, suggesting viewers were making judgments, forming preferences, developing expectations. The clinical nature of the observation disturbed me more than any explicit content would have. The sophisticated measurement of viewer responses, the controlled environment, the rotation of unwitting subjects. This wasn't amateur voyeurism, but something methodical, researched, purposeful. I was witnessing what appeared to be a psychological experiment with non-consenting participants on both sides. The observed subjects unaware of the viewers, and possibly the viewers themselves unaware of being studied through their physiological responses. After an hour, I closed the stream and immediately sent a message to Analyst Prime expressing ethical concerns about the consent issues involved. Their response came quickly, thanking me for my participation and noting that my observer metrics showed particularly interesting patterns for a first-time viewer. They explained that my heart rate, pupillary response, and attention patterns had been measured through my device's camera, a camera I had never authorized to be activated. I immediately covered my webcam with tape and ran security scans on my system. Finding nothing obvious, I still felt profoundly violated. Analyst Prime sent another message, assuring me that my data would be used anonymously and offering to share the resulting analysis for my own research. They seemed genuinely unable to understand why I might object to being monitored without consent, even while studying others being monitored without consent. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable. I didn't respond to their message. Instead, I uninstalled the specialized browser, documented my experience in an encrypted file, and tried to process what I had witnessed. The next morning, I received an email to my university account, an account I had never shared with Analyst Prime. The subject line read, "Observer Study Follow-up." The message contained a link to what was described as your observer profile based on last night's session. Against better judgment, I clicked the link using a virtual machine on a secure connection. The page displayed a detailed analysis of my viewing patterns during the previous night's stream, which subjects held my attention longest, microsecond measurements of my reactions to specific movements or expressions, comparison of my response patterns to other first-time viewers. Most disturbing was a section labeled Observer Typology Classification that categorized me as a pattern recognition dominant viewer with above-average empathic suppression and researcher consistent cognitive framework. The accuracy of this analysis from just 1 hour of unknown surveillance was deeply unsettling. More troubling was the final section of the report, which predicted with specific probability percentages how likely I would be to discuss the experience with colleagues, 17%, report it to authorities, 12%, return for additional observation sessions, 64%, or attempt to investigate further independently, 89%. The last prediction proved immediately accurate. I began researching experience rooms through legitimate academic databases and cybersecurity resources. Most scholarly references dismissed them as urban legends or scams. Law enforcement bulletins mentioned them only as potential fraud schemes rather than actual surveillance operations. The few credible mentions described them as elaborate role-playing scenarios rather than non-consensual observation. A week later, I received another email, this time containing only a date, time, and link. No message, no explanation, just another observation session invitation. I ignored it. 3 days after that, another invitation arrived, then another. The frequency increased to daily, then twice daily. Each invitation came from a different email address, making blocking ineffective. 2 weeks into this escalating pattern, I received something different, a link labeled Subject Perspective. When I accessed it through a secure system, it showed a video feed from my own office, recorded the previous day. The camera angle suggested it came from my computer's webcam, which remained covered with opaque tape. Somehow, they were still watching. I replaced my computer entirely, changed my phone, installed advanced security systems in my home, swept for hidden cameras and microphones, found nothing. Yet the invitations continued, now arriving through text messages, professional networking platforms, even comments on my academic articles, always with a date, time, and link, never with further explanation. After a month of this, I received a different type of message, an observation report similar to my own, but focused on a colleague in my department. It analyzed their viewing patterns, psychological responses, and behavioral predictions in the same clinical format as mine. The message implied that my colleague had been invited to an observation session because of their association with me. The final line read, "Observer networks expand through proximity patterns. Your data suggested 6 high compatibility potential observers in your immediate circle." I confronted my colleague cautiously, asking if they had received any unusual invitations recently. Their confused response confirmed they had no knowledge of what I was describing. I chose not to elaborate, not wanting to draw them further into whatever this was. But the implication was clear. My involvement had somehow marked those around me as potential participants. Yesterday, I received the most disturbing communication yet. Not an invitation or a report, but a video file. It showed a compilation of moments from my daily life over the previous week. Me teaching class, buying groceries, meeting with students, working in my office. Each clip was brief, captured from different angles and distances. Some appeared to come from security cameras or colleagues' devices. Others had no plausible source I could identify. The compilation ended with footage of me sleeping in my bedroom the previous night, shot from an angle that suggested a camera in the smoke detector. The file's metadata included viewing statistics. 27 observers had watched this compilation of my life. Their average heart rate, pupillary response, engagement levels, and empathic resonance scores were listed in precise detail. My existence had become content for the very system I had tried to study. This morning, I discovered a new application on my phone that I never installed. Simply labeled Observer, its icon is a minimalist eye design. I can't delete it. When opened, it shows only a counter currently reading 31 and a timer counting down from 24 hours. I don't know what happens when it reaches 0. I've turned off the phone, but found the same application appearing on my new laptop minutes later. I'm writing this account now as documentation and warning. I don't know who or what Analyst Prime represents. I don't know the purpose of these observation networks or why they focus so intently on expanding through my social connections. What I do know is that the line between observer and observed has completely collapsed in my life. Every moment now exists as potential content, every reaction as data for analysis. The most terrifying realization isn't that I'm being watched, it's that I've begun watching myself through their framework, analyzing my own reactions, considering how they might appear to observers, modifying my behavior to affect the metrics I imagine are being recorded. My internal experience has been colonized by the observation paradigm. I've internalized the clinical gaze that was directed at me. The counter on the Observer app now reads 28. Whatever happens when it reaches 0, I doubt it represents the end of this experience. More likely, it marks a transition to a new phase, perhaps from passive subject to active participant in ways I can't yet imagine. The only certainty is that in a system designed to categorize everyone as either observer or observed, eventually everyone becomes both simultaneously. The feedback loop never ends. It only expands to include more unwitting participants, more data points, more patterns to analyze. You'd probably be surprised how easy it is to see things you're not meant to, especially when you're looking for them with academic purpose, rather than just morbid curiosity. I was in my first year at Manchester studying journalism, living in one of those cramped student flats near the university, where the heating barely worked and you could hear everything your flatmates did through the paper-thin walls. The course was mostly what you'd expect: media law, ethics, how to structure articles properly. But our lecturer for digital journalism had given us an assignment that seemed more interesting than the usual fare. We were supposed to investigate an internet urban legend and write a piece debunking or confirming it. Most of my course mates picked safe options, like whether those viral videos of people doing impossible stunts were real or staged. I wanted something with more substance, something that would actually demonstrate proper investigative skills. Red rooms seemed like the perfect topic. For those who don't know, the basic premise is that there are live streams hidden somewhere on the dark web, where viewers can watch real torture and murder happening in real time. Most articles about them online were clearly written by people who had never bothered to look for themselves, just repeating the same urban legend details without any actual investigation. I figured I could spend a few weeks doing proper research, maybe find some evidence that they were technically impossible or economically unfeasible, then write a solid debunking piece, the sort of thing that might actually get published somewhere beyond the student newspaper. The research started in the university library, going through academic papers about dark web marketplaces and hidden services. Most of the scholarly work focused on drug sales and financial fraud, rather than violent content, but there were enough references to suggest that if someone wanted to host illegal streaming content, the infrastructure certainly existed. From there, I moved to online forums where people claimed to have encountered red rooms. Most of the stories were obviously fictional, full of dramatic details that sounded like they'd been lifted from horror films. But a few accounts had the mundane specificity that usually indicates someone describing something they've actually experienced rather than invented. The breakthrough came through a contact I made on a forum dedicated to investigating internet mysteries. She went by the username Archive Digger and seemed to have genuine technical knowledge rather than just repeating things she'd read elsewhere. After exchanging messages for about a week, she offered to help with my research. She explained that finding specific content on hidden networks required more than just browsing randomly. You needed connections, recommendations, invitations to private areas, the sort of access that took time to build up and couldn't be rushed. Over the next few weeks, Archive Digger introduced me to various people who claimed to have seen disturbing content online. Most turned out to be time wasters or attention seekers, but a few seemed legitimate. They spoke about the technical aspects in ways that suggested real familiarity rather than guesswork. One contact, who called himself Documentary Maker, claimed to have accessed multiple Red Room streams over the past year. He was willing to share screenshots and recordings, but only after I'd proven my serious academic interest rather than casual curiosity. The proof he provided was disturbing, but not conclusive. Dark rooms with industrial equipment, bound figures, timestamps suggesting live broadcasts. It could have been elaborate fiction, scenes from unreleased films, or genuine documentation of real events. Without seeing the streams myself, I couldn't make a definitive judgment. That's when Documentary Maker offered to arrange access to a live stream. I should probably have declined at that point. My assignment was to investigate whether red rooms existed, not necessarily to witness one firsthand. But journalism requires getting as close to the source as possible, and this seemed like the only way to provide definitive evidence one way or another. The access instructions were complex, but not particularly technical. Specific software, rotating passwords, designated times to connect. The whole process felt designed to filter out casual browsers while allowing serious viewers to find what they were looking for. When I finally connected to the stream, the interface was disappointingly ordinary. A video player embedded in a basic web page, chat area below, viewer counter on the side showing about 400 people online. Nothing sophisticated or mysterious about the presentation. The video showed what appeared to be a basement or warehouse space. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, industrial atmosphere. In the center was a metal table, and strapped to that table was a woman who appeared to be in her 20s or 30s. She was conscious but not moving much. Occasional struggles against the restraints, periodic attempts to look around the room, but mostly just lying still with the resigned expression of someone who understood their situation but had stopped fighting against it. The chat was active with comments in multiple languages, people discussing what they wanted to see happen, making suggestions, placing what appeared to be bets on various outcomes. The international nature of the audience was clear from the variety of languages being used. I watched for about 30 minutes before anything significant happened. The woman would occasionally test her restraints or try to speak, though no audio was coming through the stream. The chat maintained a running commentary, treating her like entertainment rather than a person. Then someone entered the frame. They were dressed casually, jeans, plain shirt, nothing distinctive or theatrical. No mask or costume, though the camera positioning meant I never got a clear view of their face. Just an ordinary person moving around the space with practiced efficiency. What followed was methodical preparation. The figure arranged tools on a nearby surface, adjusted camera angles, checked equipment that wasn't visible in the main feed. They seemed to be following a routine that suggested this wasn't their first time doing whatever they were about to do. The chat became more excited as the preparations continued. Comments appeared more frequently, with people making requests and suggestions. The viewer count had climbed to over 500. I realized I needed to stop watching before things went further. This was clearly going to become genuine violence, and witnessing it would cross ethical lines that no university assignment could justify. I was about to close the browser when something in the video made me pause. The camera had panned slightly, showing more of the room's background. On the wall behind the table was a section of wallpaper, an outdated floral pattern in faded blues and greens. It was the sort of decorative choice you might find in an older house that hadn't been renovated in decades. I recognized that wallpaper, not from anywhere recent, but from childhood memories. My grandmother's house in Stockport, where we'd visit every few months when I was growing up. The same pattern had been in her spare bedroom, the room where I'd sleep when we stayed overnight. Gran had died 3 years ago, and the house had been sold to cover care home costs. I'd helped clear it out, remembered stripping that wallpaper from the spare room because the new owners wanted everything neutralized before they moved in. But here it was, in a video supposedly showing a live stream from somewhere on the dark web. Either this was an incredible coincidence, or something was wrong with what I was seeing. I took screenshots of the wallpaper pattern, and compared them to photos I had from helping clear Gran's house. The match was exact. Same design, same fading, even the same small tear near the ceiling where the paper had started peeling away from the wall, which meant either the stream wasn't as live as claimed, or it was being broadcast from my grandmother's old house. I checked the property records online. The house had been sold to a couple from London who'd planned to renovate it as a rental property. But according to the electoral register, no one had actually moved in yet. The property appeared to be standing empty. The next day, I took the train to Stockport. Gran's old street looked the same as I remembered. Terraced houses built in the 1930s, small front gardens, the sort of respectable working-class neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business. Her house was about halfway down, distinguishable by the newly installed double glazing and front door that the buyers had fitted before apparently abandoning their renovation plans. I walked past several times, trying to see if there were any signs of occupancy. No cars in the drive, no lights visible through the windows, no indication that anyone was living there. But that didn't necessarily mean the property was empty. Someone could be using it without officially living there. The rear of the house backed onto an alley that ran behind the entire terrace. From there, I could see the spare bedroom window, where that distinctive wallpaper had been. The curtains were drawn, but there was a faint glow visible around the edges that suggested lights were on inside. I should have contacted the police at that point. If I was right about what I'd seen, there was serious criminal activity happening in that house. But I had no concrete evidence beyond a wallpaper pattern that could have been coincidental, and I knew how that conversation would sound to a duty officer. Instead, I decided to watch the house for a few hours to see if anyone came or went. I positioned myself in a cafe across the street with a clear view of the front door and settled in with a book and several cups of tea. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. No movement, no visitors, no signs of life from inside the property. Then, around 4 in the afternoon, a car pulled up outside. 2 people got out, a man and woman in their 30s, both dressed in ordinary clothes that wouldn't have attracted attention anywhere. They looked like the sort of couple you might see in any supermarket or walking through any town centre. Nothing distinctive or memorable about their appearance. They let themselves into the house with keys, suggesting they were either the legal owners or had legitimate access. I watched for another hour, but they didn't come back out. That evening, I checked the streaming site again. The same room was visible, the same wallpaper in the background, but the table was empty now, and the lighting was different. Someone had clearly cleaned the space and reset it for future use. The chat was active with people asking when the next session would begin. Comments suggested this was part of a regular schedule rather than a one-off event. People were discussing previous streams, comparing what they'd seen, making requests for future content. I should have left it there, reported what I'd found to the authorities, and let them handle whatever was happening in that house. My assignment was supposed to be about investigating internet myths, not getting involved in potential criminal activity. But I kept thinking about that room, about what I'd witnessed, about the casual way the chat participants had discussed real violence as entertainment. Someone needed to document what was happening, to provide evidence that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. I decided to go back to the house. This time I went after dark, parking several streets away and approaching through the back alley. The spare bedroom window still showed that faint glow around the curtain edges, and I could hear the low hum of electronic equipment running inside. There was a small gap in the curtains where they didn't quite meet properly. From the right angle, I could see a slice of the room interior. The space had been completely transformed since I'd last been inside it 3 years ago. The furniture was gone, replaced by industrial equipment and camera gear. Lights on stands, cables running across the floor. The metal table I'd seen in the stream positioned in the center of the room. And sitting at a desk in the corner, facing multiple computer screens, was the man I'd seen get out of the car earlier that afternoon. He was monitoring what appeared to be several different streams simultaneously. Chat windows scrolled with comments in various languages. Viewer counters showed hundreds of people online. Video feeds displayed different rooms that all looked similar to the one I was looking at. This wasn't just one red room. It was some kind of operation running multiple streams from different locations. As I watched, the man picked up a phone and made a call. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language suggested he was giving instructions or coordinating with someone else. After ending the call, he stood up and left the room. I should have left then. Should have gone straight to the police with what I'd seen and let them handle the investigation. Instead, I stayed by the window, curious to see what would happen next. About 10 minutes later, the man returned with someone else, a woman who appeared to be in her early 20s, walking unsteadily as if she'd been drugged or was injured. They positioned her on the metal table, and the man began setting up camera equipment for what was clearly going to be another live stream. That's when I realized I wasn't just witnessing the aftermath of criminal activity. I was watching it happen in real time. I fumbled for my phone to call the police, but as I moved, my foot slipped on the wet ground and I knocked over a dustbin in the alley. The noise echoed between the houses, and I saw the man in the room look up sharply towards the window. Our eyes met through the gap in the curtains. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he smiled, not a threatening expression, just the sort of polite acknowledgement you might give to any unexpected visitor, and reached for something on his desk. I ran, made it back to my car and drove straight home to Manchester, hands shaking as I tried to process what I'd witnessed. Once I was safely back in my flat, I tried to call the police, but found myself struggling to explain what I'd seen without admitting to trespassing and potentially compromising any investigation. In the end, I made an anonymous tip about suspicious activity at the Stockport address, providing enough details to justify a welfare check without revealing how I'd obtained the information. The next day, I checked local news websites to see if there had been any police activity in the area. Nothing appeared initially, but 2 days later, there was a brief story about a house fire in Stockport that had completely destroyed a property and left 2 people in hospital with smoke inhalation. The address matched my grandmother's old house. I never found out what the police discovered when they responded to my tip, or whether the fire was connected to what I'd witnessed. The couple who'd been hospitalized weren't named in any of the news reports, and no charges were ever mentioned in follow-up stories. The streaming sites I'd accessed went offline within a week of the incident, whether that was due to police action or the operators simply moving their activities elsewhere. I couldn't determine. I ended up writing my assignment about the technical feasibility of red rooms, rather than claiming to have found definitive proof of their existence. Got a decent grade for the research methodology, though my lecturer commented that the conclusion seemed somewhat evasive given the depth of investigation I'd apparently conducted. I never mentioned the Stockport house in my final essay. Sometimes I wonder whether I should have done more to investigate what happened after the fire, whether there were other locations, other victims who could have been helped if I'd been braver about providing detailed information to the authorities. But mostly, I try not to think about that night at all, about the casual way the man had smiled when he saw me watching, about how many other people might have been in that room, in other rooms, in other houses that look perfectly ordinary from the outside. The thing about working night shifts at McDonald's is that you become invisible. People look through you, not at you. They see the uniform, not the person. For 3 years, I was grateful for that invisibility. Now I'd give anything to truly disappear as tens of thousands of strangers count down the hours until they watch me die. It all began with a customer who kept coming in during my 3 a.m. shifts at the Tottenham Court Road branch. Always ordered the same thing, a black coffee and small fries. Always sat in the corner with his laptop. Always left exactly 1 hour later. Most night workers follow patterns, so I didn't think much of it until the night he forgot his USB drive on the table. I should have turned it in to lost property. Should have left it at the register for him to collect next time. But curiosity has always been my downfall. 6 months ago, I was just a McDonald's worker pulling night shifts in central London. Nothing special about me. Just another face on the night tube. Another overpriced flat shared with 3 others in Hackney. Another Sunday morning sleeping until 2 p.m. The kind of forgettable existence that feels safe precisely because no one's paying attention. I've always been interested in computers, not in any professional way, but as an escape from the monotony of fast food work. I'd spend my days off exploring the internet, learning basic coding, playing with old laptops I'd fix up from charity shops. I ran a small Instagram account reviewing budget tech for working class people. A few hundred followers, nothing special. That night, after my shift ended, I took the USB drive home. It looked ordinary, black plastic, no brand name. I told myself I was just checking for contact information so I could return it. The drive contained several folders with mundane labels like work projects and personal. But there was one oddly named folder, just a string of numbers and letters. Inside was a single video file. When I played it, the screen remained black for several seconds before showing what appeared to be a dimly lit room. Concrete walls, a drain in the floor, a metal table with restraints. The video showed no people, just the empty room from a fixed camera angle. In the corner of the frame was a counter displaying a 4-digit number. As I watched, it increased by 1. The video ended after exactly 3 minutes. I should have deleted it immediately, should have thrown the drive away. Instead, I kept watching it, trying to understand what I was seeing. There was something unsettling about that empty room, about the steadily increasing counter. I couldn't explain why, but it filled me with a sense of dread that lingered long after I'd shut down my computer. A week passed. The regular customer didn't return to McDonald's, and I nearly forgot about the USB drive and its strange contents. Then one night, as I was walking home after my shift, I noticed someone following me. A man in a dark coat, keeping a consistent distance behind me. When I turned corners, he turned too. When I quickened my pace, he matched it. I ducked into a 24-hour Tesco to lose him, waiting among the cereal aisles for 20 minutes before continuing home by a different route. When I arrived at my flat, I found my door unlocked. My roommates were all away that weekend, so I knew it should have been secure. Inside, nothing appeared to be missing or disturbed, but my laptop was open on my bed. I always shut it down before leaving. On the screen was a website with a black background, a counter showing thousands of viewers, and a button labeled Verify. Below it was text stating my full name and address, along with the words Identity Confirmed. I barely slept that night, kept the lights on, kept checking the door. In the morning, I went to work as usual, trying to convince myself that this was some elaborate prank. Perhaps a hacker from my YouTube audience showing off. Perhaps a case of mistaken identity. When I returned home that evening, I found my front door unlocked. The new locks had been changed again. Inside, nothing appeared to be missing or disturbed, but my laptop was open on my desk. I always shut it down before leaving. On the screen was the same website from the night before, but now the counter showed 12,307, and beneath it, my full name and address were displayed, along with the words "identity confirmed." I packed a bag and left immediately, went to a hotel in a different part of London, paid cash, used a false name, called in sick to work the next day, spent hours researching what might be happening to me. That's when I first learned about red rooms, supposedly live-stream torture or murder on the dark web, where viewers could pay to watch or even influence what happened to the victims. Most articles insisted they were urban legends. Technical experts claimed the dark web wasn't capable of supporting the bandwidth needed for live video streaming to large audiences. Law enforcement officials stated there had never been a verified case of a genuine red room. But what if they were wrong? What if someone had found a way to make it work? I stayed in the hotel for 3 days. On the 4th morning, I woke to find a note on the bedside table that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. It contained another web address and the message, "Observer status approved. Event scheduled." There was also a date and time, exactly 2 weeks from that day. I checked out immediately and went to the police, tried to explain what was happening, showed them the USB drive with the footage of me sleeping. They took a report, expressed concern about the break-ins, but became noticeably skeptical when I mentioned the dark web and the possibility of red rooms. They promised to investigate the unlawful entries to my flat, but suggested the rest might be an elaborate scam or harassment campaign, rather than a genuine threat to my life. I couldn't go back to my flat, couldn't go to work, couldn't contact friends or family for fear of putting them at risk. I withdrew as much cash as possible from my accounts and travelled to Manchester, where I checked into another hotel under another false name. That evening, I received a text message on my mobile, which I had kept switched off, except to check for messages from the police. Location update received. Manchester Observer Hub notified. I destroyed the phone immediately and bought a new pay-as-you-go model the next day. For the next week, I moved constantly. Different cities, different hotels, sometimes sleeping on overnight trains just to stay mobile. I grew a beard, wore hats and sunglasses, paid for everything in cash, never stayed anywhere more than one night. Despite these precautions, they kept finding me. Notes would appear in my hotel rooms, messages written on bathroom mirrors in condensation. Once, I returned to a room to find my laptop, which I had left packed in my bag, open on the desk with a browser showing the mysterious website. The counter had grown to tens of thousands, and now there was a countdown timer showing days, hours, and minutes until the event. I began to notice other disturbing patterns. People photographing me in public places, the same car appearing multiple times in different cities, hotel staff who seemed to recognize me despite my using different names. It felt as if an invisible network was tracking my every move, always one step ahead. After 10 days of running, I found myself in Edinburgh, exhausted and nearly out of money. I checked into a small B&B on the outskirts of the city, planning to rest for a few hours before moving again. When I entered the room, I found a laptop waiting for me on the bed. Not mine, a new one. When I opened it, the screen showed a 3D floor plan of what appeared to be an industrial building. One room was highlighted in red, containing what looked like a metal table with restraints. The blueprint was labeled Edinburgh Facility. Below the image was the current counter, now numbering in the many tens of thousands, and the countdown timer, showing less than 3 days remaining. There was also a new message. Transport will be provided. Non-compliance will result in collateral targeting of known associates. Beneath this was a list of names. My parents, my sister, my closest friends. That's when I realized the true scope of what I was facing. This wasn't one person stalking me. This wasn't even a small group. This was an organized network with resources, reach, and apparently unlimited access to information about me and everyone I cared about. I considered ending my own life to deny them their event, but the threat against my family stopped me. Without knowing the extent of this network, I couldn't be sure they wouldn't follow through regardless. Instead, I formulated a plan. I would go to the police again, this time with the new laptop as evidence. I would insist on protective custody, not just for me, but for my family. I would tell them everything, including my growing suspicion about what the verification process really meant. I believe I wasn't randomly targeted. The original email, the white paper, it was all a test. They were looking for someone with specific knowledge of network security, but not high profile enough to be immediately missed. The verification was confirming I met their criteria. I made it within 2 blocks of the police station before I noticed the surveillance. 3 different people monitoring the approach, all speaking into earpieces. A car idling directly in front. 2 men watching the entrance. They had anticipated this move. I diverted to a public library instead, found a computer. That's where I'm writing this, from a public library computer. A warning, a record, evidence of what's happening, in case anyone ever investigates my disappearance. The counter on the website now shows tens of thousands of viewers. The countdown is at less than a day and counting. I have to assume they're monitoring public networks, so I won't be able to stay here long. Here's what I've pieced together. The dark web isn't just hosting these red rooms, it's being used to coordinate an entire infrastructure around them. Spotters, monitors, facilities in different cities, a subscription base that apparently numbers in the tens of thousands. Most disturbing is the verification process itself. I think the reason these red rooms have never been conclusively proven to exist is that they're constantly changing, moving between locations, using different methods, different personnel. No one person knows the entire operation except those at the very top. The participants, the viewers, are verified gradually through a series of interactions that assess their trustworthiness and commitment. Each is given small tasks related to monitoring or facilitating. Each becomes complicit in the system before they ever see a full event. By the time they witness what really happens, they're already implicated, already part of it, already unable to go to authorities without incriminating themselves. It's the perfect self-sustaining system of horror. Everyone involved has incentive to maintain secrecy. Everyone shares in the culpability. Everyone is both observer and participant. I wonder how many others have written warnings like this one. How many have tried to expose what's happening only to disappear before anyone took them seriously? How many have ended up on those metal tables in nondescript industrial buildings, their final hours broadcast to thousands of paying viewers? The librarian is giving me odd looks. I've been here too long. Someone just entered wearing an earpiece. I need to move again. If you're reading this and you receive an email asking for your professional opinion on something related to your field, be careful. If you receive strange messages about verification processes, be afraid. If you find evidence that someone has been in your home while you slept, run and keep running. The counter never stops growing. Right now, tens of thousands of people are waiting to watch what happens to me tomorrow night. How many will be watching when they come for you? I'm leaving the library now. I still have less than a day to find a way out of this, to protect my family, to somehow disappear more effectively than I have so far. I don't have much hope, but I have to try. Remember my warning. The red rooms are real. The network is vast, and the verification process may already have begun for you without your knowledge. One click is all it takes. I never considered myself tech-savvy. Just average, really. I could navigate basic computer functions, use standard software, and handle simple troubleshooting. Nothing special. My job as a data entry specialist for a medical billing company required minimal technical skills, mostly just inputting codes and numbers into pre-designed systems. Monotonous work, but it paid the bills. My roommate Eli was the tech expert between us. Computer science major, spent his free time coding and discussing cybersecurity on forums. Always had 3 monitors running simultaneously, all displaying things I couldn't begin to understand. When our internet connection slowed down for the 3rd time in a month, Eli decided to upgrade our router and reconfigure our home network. That's when everything changed. While setting up the new security features, Eli discovered unusual traffic patterns originating from our IP address. Late-night data transfers, connections to unfamiliar servers, encrypted packets being sent at regular intervals, all happening when both of us should have been asleep. The timestamps showed activity between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. almost every night for the past 6 weeks. I assured him it wasn't me. My laptop was basic and mainly used for streaming shows and occasionally working from home. Eli checked my system anyway, running diagnostic tools I'd never heard of. That's when he found a hidden partition on my hard drive. According to Eli, someone had remotely accessed my laptop and created a separate storage area invisible to standard file explorers. Inside was a Tor browser installation, cryptocurrency wallet software, and a folder containing what appeared to be encryption keys. The browser history showed regular visits to .onion domains, dark web addresses unreachable through normal browsers. The most frequently visited site was something called the Observatory. My first instinct was to wipe the laptop completely, but Eli advised against it. This was evidence of a serious security breach, possibly even criminal activity being conducted through my device. We needed to understand what was happening before eliminating the evidence. Eli suggested setting up monitoring software to see what happened during those late-night sessions. If someone was remotely accessing my laptop, we could capture information about them. For the next 3 nights, we left my laptop powered on, but disconnected from the internet. Nothing happened. On the 4th night, Eli configured it to record screen activity while allowing internet access again. We both slept in his room rather than mine, my laptop left on my desk, its webcam covered with electrical tape just to be safe. The next morning, we reviewed the recordings. At 2:17 a.m., my laptop woke from sleep mode without any physical interaction. The screen displayed the Tor browser launching automatically, connecting to the network, then navigating to an address consisting of random letters and numbers ending in .onion. A login screen appeared, and credentials were entered automatically from saved data. Then the screen went black except for a simple interface, a video player, a chat window, and a timer counting down from 90 minutes. The video showed an empty room with plain walls. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing happened on screen. The chat window occasionally flashed with new messages. but they were in a language neither of us recognized. At the 22-minute mark, a person entered the frame. They wore ordinary clothes, but had their face digitally blurred, not covered, but processed to be unrecognizable. They sat in a chair facing the camera and held up a digital tablet displaying that day's date and time. For the next hour, the person simply sat there while messages continued appearing in the chat. Occasionally, they would shift position slightly or check the tablet. Nothing dramatic occurred. Then, at the 83-minute mark, the person stood up, approached the camera, and adjusted it to pan around the room, revealing a second chair that had previously been out of frame. The person returned to their original position, and the feed continued until the timer reached 0. Then the browser closed automatically, and the laptop returned to sleep mode. Eli was convinced we were witnessing some kind of scam operation. His theory was that someone had compromised my laptop to use it as a proxy for accessing the dark web, specifically to participate in what appeared to be paid viewings of some underground content. The mundane nature of what we'd seen was puzzling, but Eli explained that dark web red rooms were largely considered urban myths, purported live streams of extreme content that most cybersecurity experts dismissed as scams designed to steal cryptocurrency. We agreed to monitor for one more night before wiping the system and implementing stronger security measures. That night followed the same pattern, except the room shown in the video feed contained both chairs from the start, both empty. After 17 minutes, a person entered, same blurred face effect, and sat in one chair. They held up the tablet with the date and time, then set it aside. The chat window became more active. At the 36-minute mark, a second person entered the frame and sat in the other chair. Their face was similarly blurred. They held up no tablet, made no introductions. Both figures simply sat facing the camera while the chat continued to fill with messages. At the 54-minute mark, both figures stood simultaneously. The first approached the camera and adjusted it again, panning to show more of the room. In the corner, barely visible, was a third chair. The figures returned to their seats. The feed continued until the timer expired. The pattern was clear now. Each night added a new chair, revealed at some point during the broadcast. Eli was still convinced it was an elaborate scam, but couldn't explain the purpose. If someone was paying to watch this, what were they getting for their money? We decided to monitor one more night before taking action. The third recording began the same way. 3 chairs visible from the start, 3 blurred figures entering at different times, each holding up the tablet with the date and time. The chat window was more active than previous nights. At the 62-minute mark, all 3 figures stood, and one adjusted the camera to reveal a 4th chair in the corner of the room. Unlike the others, this chair had restraints attached to the armrests and legs. That was enough. The next morning, Eli helped me completely wipe my laptop, reinstall the operating system, and set up advanced security measures. We changed our network configuration, implemented strict firewalls, and Eli even installed monitoring software on our router to alert us to any unusual traffic patterns. For good measure, I started shutting down my laptop completely at night and storing it in a drawer. A week passed without incident. No strange connections, no unexplained data transfers. It seemed the problem had been resolved. Eli's theory was that my laptop had been randomly targeted by a botnet, compromised through some vulnerability in my outdated security software. The whole Red Room business was likely just a scam targeting people on the dark web, convincing them to pay cryptocurrency to watch increasingly elaborate, but ultimately fake exclusive content. Then I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply "Observation continues." The body contained only an attached image file. Against better judgment, I opened it. The image showed my bedroom, taken from the perspective of my laptop's webcam. The timestamp in the corner showed a date from the previous night at exactly 2:17 a.m. My laptop had been shut down and in a drawer at that time. I showed the email to Eli, who examined the metadata and confirmed the timestamp hadn't been altered. He checked my laptop again, but found no evidence of any compromise or activation. It was as if the image had been taken by a device that wasn't there. That night, we set up a separate camera in my room, positioned to monitor the drawer where I kept my laptop. The recordings showed nothing unusual. No one entered the room. The drawer remained closed all night. Yet the next morning, I received another email with another image of my bedroom at 2:17 a.m., taken from the exact same webcam angle, despite my laptop being securely stored away. Eli suggested staying somewhere else for a few days while he conducted a more thorough investigation of our apartment. I arranged to stay with a colleague and packed enough clothes for a week. Before leaving, I removed the battery from my laptop entirely, rendering it incapable of any function. 3 days into my stay at my colleague's place, another email arrived. Same subject line, same format. The attached image showed me sleeping in my colleague's guest room. The angle was identical to where a laptop webcam would be positioned if there had been a laptop in the room, which there wasn't. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. from the previous night. I returned home immediately, finding Eli surrounded by dismantled electronics. He had been systematically checking every device in our apartment for hidden cameras or unknown surveillance equipment. He found nothing unusual until he examined my old laptop battery that I had removed and left behind. According to him, it had been modified to include a small cellular modem, a component that could maintain a connection to the internet independently of the laptop itself, allowing for remote access even when the computer appeared to be completely powered down. This discovery prompted a more thorough investigation. Eli removed the battery from his own laptop and examined it, finding a similar modification. Further checks revealed that our router, which Eli had purchased online 6 months earlier, contained custom firmware that differed from the manufacturer's specifications. Even our smart TV had been modified to allow remote access to its integrated camera. The implications were clear. Our entire apartment had been compromised, not randomly, but with deliberate and sophisticated precision. Someone had methodically created a surveillance network within our living space, using our own devices against us. Eli contacted a cybersecurity professional he knew from his university, who agreed to examine our equipment. Their conclusion was disturbing. The modifications were professional grade, suggesting resources and expertise beyond typical hackers. The cellular modems in our batteries connected to private networks rather than commercial carriers, making them virtually untraceable. Most concerning was the discovery that these modifications had been in place for at least 8 months, far longer than the 6 weeks of suspicious network activity we had initially detected. We moved out of the apartment the following week, found separate places, disposed of all our electronics, purchased new devices from physical stores rather than online. I changed jobs, started using cash instead of cards whenever possible, and implemented every privacy measure recommended by Eli's security contact. 3 months passed without incident. No strange emails, no unexplained images. Life began to return to a semblance of normalcy, though I still covered any webcam with tape and stored my devices in a signal-blocking pouch at night. Then last week, I received a package at my new address, an address I had shared with very few people. Inside was a brand new laptop, still sealed in its factory packaging. No note, no return address. I left it untouched and contacted Eli, who arranged for his cybersecurity contact to examine it in a controlled environment. The laptop was factory sealed and appeared completely normal upon initial inspection. The operating system was a standard installation with no obvious modifications. It was only when they disassembled the device that they discovered the anomaly, a custom component integrated into the motherboard, virtually indistinguishable from the original parts unless you knew exactly what to look for. According to the security expert, this component would have allowed remote activation of the laptop even when powered off. More disturbing was their assessment that this wasn't an aftermarket modification. It had been integrated during the manufacturing process, which should have been impossible without inside access to the production facility. Yesterday, I received a text message from an unknown number. It contained only a time, 2:17 a.m. I didn't sleep last night. Instead, I sat in the dark of my new apartment, watching the clock. At exactly 2:17 a.m., every electronic device I owned, my new phone, my replacement laptop, my smart TV, turned on simultaneously, screens displaying the same image. An empty room with 5 chairs arranged in a semicircle. 4 were occupied by figures with blurred faces. The 5th chair, positioned in the center, remained empty. The screens displayed this image for exactly 1 minute before shutting off. I've since disconnected everything, removed batteries, cut power to my apartment. I'm writing this at a public library on a computer that has no connection to me. When I finish, I'm leaving the city, maybe the country. I don't know who these observers are or what they want. I don't know how they've managed to integrate themselves into devices that should be secure, or how they tracked me to my new location. What I do know is that the chairs in that room have been increasing by 1 each night, and the newest chair, the empty one, is meant for me. The most terrifying realization isn't that they're watching, it's that they're waiting. Each night at 2:17 a.m., a broadcast goes live somewhere on the dark web. People pay to watch, to participate in whatever this is. And somehow, through means I can't understand, I've moved from being an unwitting proxy in their observation network to being the subject of their observation itself. If you're reading this and suddenly find your devices behaving strangely, or discover unexplained network activity in the early morning hours, don't make the mistake I made. Don't investigate. Don't monitor. Don't try to understand. Just run.